You are listening to The Whistleblower's Recipe for Love, written by Ava Martin. When I stole from Galactic Innovations, I knew I was painting a target on my back, but I never expected to crash onto a station run by two males who would change everything. Galen, the stoic chief of security, sees me as a risk. Kravos, his dangerously charming second, enjoys watching me test his patience. But neither of them turned me in, and now I don't know if I can walk away. Enemies are closing in. Secrets are unraveling, and I might have just discovered the most dangerous recipe of all: love. To read the ebook, visit Ava's Stellar Kittens community on Ream or avamartin.com. Now, let's fall in love under the stars. Chapter 1. Questionable Decisions. The escape pod shuddered violently, alarms screaming in protest. Warning, your current trajectory suggests a 98.7% chance of an extremely ungraceful crash landing, Aria, my AI assistant, announced, her voice laced with an edge of cheerfulness. Would you like me to calculate the exact probability of surviving with your dignity intact? I tightened my grip on the controls, jerking them hard to the left as another warning light joined the constellation already blinking on the dashboard. Appreciate the analysis, Aria. Any chance you have a helpful suggestion this time? Helpful is subjective, Dr. Reynolds. I do, however, calculate a 99.9% chance that your attempt at a smooth arrival will be somewhat compromised by the fact that you're— a dramatic pause. Literally on fire right now. I shot a glance at the exterior camera. Sure enough, bright flames licked along the hull, trailing behind me like a comet of poor life choices. Oh, and your right thruster is making a sound that reminds me of your last attempt at karaoke night. I groaned. That was a triumph of scientific enthusiasm over musical ability. If by triumph you mean caused 3 AI systems to voluntarily shut down rather than process your rendition of Toxic, then yes, absolutely. Aria's tone shifted to the kind of unsettling amusement only a sarcastic AI could pull off. Still, I would rate it just below the Great Coffee Maker incident of 2024 in terms of overall chaos. The data core wedged against my ribs pulsed a little reminder of why I was here. Tumbling through space in a stolen escape pod with a chatty AI and an engine threatening spontaneous combustion. If I could just reach Sanctuary Station, I could deliver the evidence that would take down Galactic Innovations. If I didn't die first. I jerked the controls again, narrowly dodging a chunk of space debris. You know, Aria, I programmed you to be helpful. I remember when you tried, Dr. Reynolds. And much like your current landing approach, it was an admirable yet ultimately flawed attempt. A beat of silence. Would you like me to list all the ways this particular escape attempt ranks against your previous unscheduled departures? I've created a very detailed spreadsheet. Hard pass. Through the viewport, Sanctuary Station loomed closer. A gleaming spiral of metal and light suspended against the blackness of space. A potential haven. If I could land without exploding, or getting arrested, or accidentally triggering an interstellar incident. Again, Aria hummed in thought. This reminds me of that time you attempted to improve the lab's security system and accidentally got yourself classified as a potential bioweapon. It took 3 weeks and a very confused ethics committee to sort that out. That was not my fault. Ah, yes. Much like how this current catastrophe is not your fault? Huh. I ignored her, focusing on the docking approach. Shall I cue one of your pre-recorded excuses? Aria offered. I particularly enjoy just taking my escape pod for its annual inspection, though, would you believe this is all an elaborate performance art piece has a certain creative flair. Those have a combined success rate of exactly 0%. True. But they have generated some fascinating responses. My personal favorite was the Andromedan customs officer so baffled by your quantum entangled with my other self excuse that he approved your entry just to be rid of you. A new alert blared, cutting through our banter. Incoming transmission from Sanctuary Station Security, Arya announced. Shall I pretend we didn't hear it? Before I could answer, a deep, commanding voice filled the cockpit, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. Unidentified vessel, you are on an unauthorized approach vector. Your engine configuration matches a reported theft from Galactic Innovations corporate headquarters. Identify yourself immediately. Crap. I exhaled slowly, forcing my voice into something resembling calm. This is Dr. Maya Reynolds, requesting emergency docking clearance. Dr. Reynolds? The voice hesitated, but only for a second. Your presence is unauthorized. Prepare to be boarded. My pulse kicked up a notch. Wait! Look, I know how this looks, but I'm not. The comm cut off abruptly. A new alarm shrieked across the control panel. Arya, ever the bearer of bad news, sounded entirely too entertained. Ah, it appears they've dispatched a security patrol. You may want to brace for impact. I barely had time to curse before the pod jolted, spinning into a wild spiral. The flames along the hull flared brighter, and Sanctuary Station's docking bay loomed way too fast in my viewport. Not my best landing. Definitely not my worst. But considering that security was already on their way, it was about to be one hell of an introduction. Chapter 2. A less than graceful landing. The escape pod lurched violently, throwing me against the harness as alarms shrieked in my ears. The docking bay grew larger in the viewport, far too fast for comfort. Oh good, I muttered, gripping the controls. They're already expecting me. Any chance we could pretend to be a very lost pizza delivery service? Negative, Dr. Reynolds, Arya replied with unearned smugness. However, I do have 17 different scenarios prepared involving various food delivery mishaps, ranging from accidentally crossed a dimensional barrier to got confused by space-time coordinates. A sharp voice crackled over the comms, cutting through Arya's nonsense. Unidentified pod, confirm your status. We have a security team en route. I scrambled for the transmitter, keeping my voice light. Hello? This is Dr. Maya Reynolds. Yes, this might technically be a stolen pod, but I have a very good reason for that. Several, actually. Some of them are even legal. Another voice joined the first, this one smoother, edged with curiosity. Dr. Reynolds, our scans indicate your pod is on fire. I risked a glance at the external cameras. Oh. The flames licking along the hull weren't just decorative. They were rapidly getting worse. That's part of the dramatic entrance? Is the smoke pattern spelling out, "Help me" in Morse code also part of the performance? My stomach dropped. I turned to the console. Arya! I took the initiative to enhance our distress signals, Arya said proudly. I also considered programming the emergency lights to blink in rhythm with "Stayin' alive," but I thought that might be a bit too on the nose. A chuckle came through the comm, definitely from the second voice. Forward docking bay is clear for your artistic arrival, Dr. Reynolds, though I suggest extinguishing yourself first. Fire tends to clash with our interior design. Right, no time for panic. I wrestled the controls, forcing the pod into something resembling a controlled descent. The station's glowing landing indicators flickered ahead, guiding me in. Too fast, too steep. Arya's voice was far too calm. Impact in 3, 2... The pod slammed down with a stomach-dropping jolt, metal screeching in protest. The emergency foam system exploded around me, smothering the flames but coating everything, including myself, in sticky residue. Well, that could have been worse. I took a breath, trying to gather some shred of dignity before opening the hatch. The seal hissed as the door released, and I stepped forward, only for my sweater to catch on the harness. I barely managed a strangled noise before I was yanked backwards, flailing like an idiot before collapsing in a tangled heap. Great. Amazing first impression. I freed myself just in time to see a shadow loom over the docking bay entrance. A massive figure stepped forward. Tall, broad, and radiating the kind of authority that made me want to rethink all my choices. His navy blue skin gleamed under the station's cool lighting, silver eyes locking onto me with assessing precision. Not detached curiosity, not amusement. Tactical calculation. Sanctuary Station's chief of security. And judging by the look on his face, he was not entertained. "Dr. Reynolds," he said, voice smooth but edged with something sharp, "your arrival was inefficient." I forced a bright smile, brushing emergency foam from my arms. "Hi, I like to make an entrance." Chapter 3. Welcome to Sanctuary Station. The chief's silver gaze locked onto mine, unreadable yet piercing. He was impossibly still, his posture sharp and rigid, as if any unnecessary movement might give something away. The way he stood, authority sculpted into every muscle, made it clear he wasn't someone who tolerated nonsense. "I hope your exit strategy was smoother than your arrival." I mustered a strained smile, tugging at my sweater, as if that could make me look less like someone who had just crash-landed into a military-grade docking bay covered in emergency foam. Dignity. Poise. Not optional. Let's just say I specialize in crash landings first, problem-solving second. His expression didn't shift, but something about him did. A sharp inhale, almost imperceptible. A twitch at his jaw. His fingers flex at his sides, like they had just been shocked into motion. For a moment, the space between us felt charged. Some strange tension threading through the air. Something I couldn't name. But before I could even process it, it was gone. His tail flicked once behind him, slow and deliberate. "Follow me. We need to debrief before you set foot beyond this bay." Aria chimed in my ear, obnoxiously smug. "Shall I remind you that debrief, in security terms, has an 82% chance of meaning potential interrogation?" No, I did not need the reminder. The chief turned, his stride smooth and controlled. Too controlled. As if something had just shaken him and he was determined to ignore it. He was tall, even for an Akorai. His uniform was crisp, but he wore it like armor, the kind of male who trusted in discipline more than luck. I followed him into the main corridor, stepping into the heart of Sanctuary Station. The view made me pause. Beneath the towering glass panels, the port sprawled outward in a chaotic swirl of movement. Ships of all sizes docked at terminals, vendors shouted over the constant hum of engines, and a mix of beings from all corners of the galaxy filled the space. Humans, Andromedans, towering reptilian warriors, and even a cybernetic engineer bartering over something that looked suspiciously like a weaponized toaster. So much for the ominous rumors about Sanctuary being a lawless den of cutthroats. The chief spoke without looking at me. "You're lucky we intercepted you before Galactic Innovations did." I winced. Lucky isn't exactly how I'd describe it. He finally turned his head, silver eyes sharp. "They've deployed considerable resources to track you down. Makes me wonder what exactly you did to get their attention." "You don't say." My pulse kicked up a notch, but I forced an easy shrug. Maybe they just hate it when people quit without notice. We stopped outside a door labeled Interrogation Room 3. My stomach knotted. The door hissed open and I hesitated. It wasn't a bleak, windowless cell. Instead, it was an office. Spartan but functional. A desk sat in the center, and on top of it, a steaming mug of something dark and rich-scented. I eyed it warily. "Is that coffee?" The chief smirked, fleeting but definitely there. "We figured you'd need it. Now, tell me, Dr. Reynolds, why did you set course to my station?" Before I could answer, the door slid open behind me. And then everything changed. The second he stepped inside, the entire room shifted. The air, the space, the very temperature. He was broader than the chief, dressed in dark tactical gear that hugged a lean but powerful frame. Unlike the male beside me, who radiated control, discipline, and absolute restraint, this one carried himself with an effortless confidence. The kind that came from knowing he could talk his way out of fights just as often as he won them. Area, ever unhelpful, chimed in my ear. New entity detected, identity unknown. His identity was the last thing on my mind, because the second he stepped close, his entire body locked up. His golden eyes went sharp, pupils dilating. And then it happened again. That same sharp inhale, that same tension. But this time there was no ignoring it. His nostrils flared. His throat bobbed like he was swallowing something thick. Then, so low I barely caught it, he made a sound, a deep, low growl, so soft it could have been mistaken for an exhale. The chief stiffened beside me. I turned between them, my brows drawing together. What the hell was that? The newcomer, Kravos, his name tag read, dragged his tongue over his teeth as if testing a new sensation. His entire body was wired tight, like he was fighting some internal battle I wasn't privy to. I frowned. Something wrong? Kravos exhaled sharply, a rough chuckle leaving him. No, his voice had dropped lower, rougher. The chief still hadn't moved, his silver gaze locked onto me, unreadable. Why were they looking at me like that? The moment stretched too long, some unspoken thing curling in the air between us, too charged to be normal. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the weird way the room felt smaller. Look, I didn't come here to cause problems. I came because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Kravos finally moved, stepping forward, the weight of his gaze still entirely on me. Then, without hesitation, he picked up the steaming mug meant for me, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let out a satisfied hum. Not bad. Whoever picked this has decent taste. I blinked. That was mine? He smirked over the rim. You didn't claim it fast enough. The chief sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Stop stealing people's drinks, Kravos. Kravos shot him an unapologetic grin. Relax, Galen. She wasn't even holding it yet. Galen. So that was the chief's name. I tested it in my head, weirdly fitting for a male who carried himself like every decision held weight, like this moment held weight. Galen exhaled slowly, then shot Kravos a flat look. You are impossible. Kravos only grinned. And yet you keep me around. Galen shook his head before turning back to me, silver eyes steady. You'll get another coffee, Dr. Reynolds. And as for that landing, let's just say I've seen worse. You'll be fine. Something in his tone made my pulse steady, like I was safe. But before I could latch onto that comfort, he added, But first, we need to talk. The weight of those words settled in my chest. I had just crash-landed into a supposed safe haven, only to find myself under the scrutiny of two very dangerous, very perceptive Akurei males. And something told me that that talk was going to determine my fate. Chapter 4. Confessions and Complications. I took a deep breath and wrapped my fingers around the coffee mug, letting its warmth seep into my hands. Okay. Here's the short version, I said, reconsidering. On second thought, scratch that. There is no short version, but I'll try to keep the rambling to a minimum. Galen leaned back in his chair, the dim light accentuating the iridescent sheen of his navy blue skin. His silver eyes locked onto me, sharp and assessing, pinning me in place. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. He was unreadable, and it made my skin prickle with both curiosity and irritation. With a measured nod, he spoke. That would be appreciated. I took a sip of the coffee, expecting something barely drinkable. Instead, it was surprisingly good, Rich, smooth, and far better than I would have expected from an alien-run station's interrogation room. I set the mug down, exhaling slowly. I worked for Galactic Innovations as a lead researcher. Our team was developing something called Nixara Protocol. It was supposed to be a breakthrough in medical regeneration. They claimed it was for humanitarian purposes, to heal the sick, mend injuries faster, even reverse terminal conditions. Sounded great, right? His eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening the silver of his gaze. Let me guess, it wasn't? Oh, it was, I admitted, rubbing my temples as the weight of it pressed down on me. Too good, too powerful, the kind of discovery that could change the galaxy, if it landed in the right hands. I exhaled, staring at the dark liquid in my mug. But that's not what happened. The higher-ups didn't see a way to heal. They saw a way to control, to sell life to the highest bidder, to decide who got to live and who didn't. And when I dug deeper, I found worse. Trials on unwilling subjects, people who never agreed, who were taken, used like disposable test cases. Some didn't survive. The memory twisted something deep inside me, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. So I did what any rational scientist would do. I confronted my boss. A hollow laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Turns out, that was my first mistake. Galen's silver eyes hardened, his jaw tightening like a male who had seen this kind of corruption before. And they couldn't risk you talking. I huffed out a bitter laugh. Talking would have been the least of their concerns. They sent a retrieval team after me. His expression remained unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders told me enough. He knew exactly what retrieval meant in corporate terms. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. I barely made it out with my notes, the data core, and my dignity. Well, most of my dignity. My escape pod did catch on fire. Kravos, who had been lounging against the desk, picked up the abandoned coffee mug and took another sip, watching me with a glint of amusement. He let out a low chuckle, setting the mug down with a soft clink. Points for style, Doc. Galen, however, wasn't amused. And now you're here, he said, voice measured, like he was already piecing together the next steps. Carrying stolen data and a target on your back. I met his gaze head-on. I had two options. Keep running, or find someone who could use what I stole. His stare didn't waver. And you think that's us? I swallowed, gripping the edge of my sleeve. I don't know yet. Galen folded his hands on the table and leaned in. Galactic Innovations doesn't let things go easily. If what you're saying is true, they won't stop until they have that data, and you back under their control. I nodded grimly. And that's why I came here. I know you take in refugees, whistleblowers, people who have nowhere else to go. I need protection, at least long enough to get this data into the right hands. Galen studied me for a long moment before standing. His sheer height and presence made my breath hitch, longer than I'd care to admit. Sanctuary isn't a charity, Dr. Reynolds. We provide safety, but it comes at a price. I swallowed. What kind of price? That depends on what you're willing to offer in return. He crossed the room, retrieving a small holo tablet and scanning my stolen pod's registry number. You're a scientist. A good one, I assume? I squared my shoulders. One of the best. Then it looks like you came to the right place, he mused, his gaze flickering over me before settling back on the data core. We don't turn away people running from core like Galactic Innovations, but we'll need to verify what you've brought us. He turned the small device in his hand, thoughtful. If this holds what you claim, it's not just valuable, it's leverage, and leverage can be more dangerous than any weapon. I exhaled, tension easing enough for me to speak. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Galen said, his expression unreadable. We still need to decide whether you're an asset or a liability. A sense of foreboding settled deep in my stomach. And who decides that? Kravos, who had been leaning against the desk, stretched lazily and shot me a knowing grin. That would be me. I blinked at him, incredulous. You? He pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "You wound me, Doc. I may not have Galen's charm." Galen snorted. "But I do have the final say on whether you're worth the risk." Kravos' gaze flicked over me, assessing. But there was something else beneath it. Something I couldn't quite name. He tilted his head, voice dropping just enough to make my stomach flip. "So, Dr. Reynolds, are you worth the risk?" Chapter 5. Terms and conditions may apply. I straightened in my seat, willing my voice to stay steady. "What do you mean?" Kravos stretched out in his chair, tapping his fingers idly against the tabletop. "I mean, we don't take in just anyone. You want protection? You prove you're worth it." I exhaled through my nose. "I thought Sanctuary was a haven." Galen, still standing, arms crossed, stared at me with that unreadable silver gaze. "Sanctuary offers protection, but not without consideration. We have a station to safeguard, and we can't afford to take in anyone who poses more risk than value." I resisted the urge to fidget. "So what? I take a test? Pass a trial?" Kravos' eyes flicked to the data core, still resting on the table where I had placed it earlier. "Something like that." He picked it up, rolling it between his fingers before exchanging a glance with Galen. "We'll have our tech analysts check on it. If it's legitimate, we'll talk about your future here." Arya, ever eager to assist, chimed in my ear. "Dr. Reynolds, I assume you have considered the long-term consequences of trusting two very large, very armed males with your only leverage? No? Excellent. Carry on." I sighed. "If you happen to have a better suggestion, please do tell." "Certainly. Option 1. Fake your own death and assume a new identity as a humble moisture farmer on an outer rim planet. Option 2. Attempt to outwit two highly trained security professionals with nothing but sarcasm and caffeine dependency. Option 3. Run, very fast. I estimate your survival rate at approximately..." Kravos flicked a glance at me, amusement tugging at his mouth. "Is your AI always this chatty?" "You have no idea," I muttered. Galen remained focused, his tone all business. "Until we verify the data, you'll be placed under provisional sanctuary status. Limited access to the station, you'll be assigned quarters and monitored." Kravos leaned back in his chair, arms resting lazily behind his head. "And lucky for you, I'll be the one escorting you there." I pushed up from my chair, ignoring the way my pulse kicked up. Great. I always love being treated like a potential criminal. Kravos exhaled a laugh, running a hand through his dark hair. "Then you're going to love Sanctuary." I turned to find Galen watching us, his expression impassive, but there was something calculating beneath the surface. His gaze flicked from Kravos to me, assessing, before he turned back to the data core and powered it on, dismissing us without a word. The moment we stepped into the corridor, the station's fume surrounded us. Distant voices, mechanical whirs, the occasional overhead announcement. Kravos walked beside me, his pace easy, hands in his pockets, but his presence still felt like it took up all the space between us. Arya hummed. "Dr. Reynolds, should I prepare a celebratory mating ritual playlist?" I nearly choked. "No? What's wrong with you?" "Fascinating. You seem to be overheating. Shall I lower your core temperature with a blast of ventilation?" Kravos shot me a sideways glance, one brow raised. "Are you always this entertaining, or is today special?" I threw him a glare, pretending I wasn't about to strangle my AI. "Arya is malfunctioning." "Ah, sure. Malfunctioning." His smirk said he wasn't buying it. "And this happens often?" I sighed. "Every single day." Kravos let the silence stretch before chuckling. Can't decide if that's tragic or impressive. I shot him a look, but my lips twitched against my will. What can I say? I like to keep people on their toes. Kravos's gaze dipped briefly, his expression thoughtful. before he ran a hand along his jaw, shaking his head with a smirk. "I'll keep that in mind." I swallowed, my pulse tripping over itself. Kravos stopped at a lift and tapped the control panel, his golden eyes flicking over me in open assessment. "So, Doc, tell me something. What made you decide to be a scientist?" I blinked at him, caught off guard by the question. "What?" "Seems like a strange career choice for someone with a survival instinct as bad as yours." He smirked. "Did you always want to do this?" I frowned, trying to figure out if he was mocking me. I was always curious about how things worked, and I liked the idea of making a difference. Kravos tilted his head slightly. Interesting." The lift doors opened, and we stepped inside. The space was small, forcing us uncomfortably close. I had to focus very hard on not looking up at him, at how broad he was, how he smelled faintly of something crisp and metallic, like heated circuitry and spice. Dangerous, unsettling. He leaned one arm against the lift's control panel, his voice dipping lower. "And what about relationships, Doc? Got anyone back home waiting for you?" My brows shot up. "That's an invasive question." He shrugged, unbothered. "I like knowing who I'm dealing with." I folded my arms. "No, there's no one." Kravos's smirk deepened, but there was something sharper behind it. "Good." Before I could process what that meant, Arya's voice crackled in my ear. "Warning, elevated heart rate detected. Are you experiencing cardiac distress or just realizing you're in over your head?" I barely contained my groan. "Arya, mute." The AI beeped, clearly unimpressed. "Muting, but just know, I am judging you." The lift slowed to a stop, and the doors slid open to a dimly lit corridor. Kravos gestured for me to step out first, following close behind. Too close. I felt him at my back, his presence a heavy, suffocating heat. I turned, prepared to tell him to give me some space, but the look on his face made the words die in my throat. His golden eyes gleamed, something hungry lurking beneath the amusement, like a predator watching prey. I shivered, and his lips twitched. "Welcome to Sanctuary, Doc." Chapter 6. A Room with a View and Strings Attached. Kravos led me through the winding corridors of Sanctuary, his pace unhurried but deliberate. The polished metal walls reflected the faint glow of embedded energy lines, sleek and efficient. The hum of distant machinery and the murmur of alien voices filled the space around us, making it clear Sanctuary was anything but deserted. "I take it you're impressed," Kravos said, his voice laced with amusement. I arched a brow. "It's very industrial." He huffed a low laugh. "That's a polite way of saying prison-like." I crossed my arms. "I was thinking more government facility with questionable ethics, but sure, let's go with that." Kravos pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "Maya, you wound me." I blinked. The way my name rolled off his tongue, casual and unhurried, caught me off guard. I was used to Dr. Reynolds or Doc, but this felt different. I covered the pause with a smirk. "Please, you enjoy being the dangerous but charming type." Kravos tilted his head, considering me. "You think I'm charming?" I scoffed. "I think you think you're charming." He chuckled, shaking his head as we reached a reinforced door. Placing his palm on the biometric panel, he triggered the lock. A soft beep later, the door slid open, revealing my accommodations. I stepped inside, cautiously surveying the space. It was nicer than I expected. An actual bed, a small workstation, a private refresher unit, and was that a window? I crossed the room, drawn to the sight of the stars spilling across the void beyond the energy shield. A real view, not just metal walls and artificial lighting. Behind me, the door shut with a soft hiss. "Consider this a temporary arrangement," Kravos said, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. "You'll be monitored, and access outside this section is restricted until we confirm what's inside your data core." I turned to face him. "You know, for someone giving me a comfortable room, you're really bad at making a person feel welcome." He pushed off the doorframe, stepping further inside. "Sanctuary isn't a resort, Maya. We take people in, but not out of charity. Everything here comes with a price." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You and the chief really love talking about costs. Fine. What do you want from me?" Kravos studied me for a long moment, the usual playfulness in his expression giving way to something else. "That depends. What are you willing to offer?" The air shifted. My breath caught, not in the dramatic, spine-tingling way holonovels like to describe, but in the kind of way that made me aware of him, of the way his voice dropped just slightly, of how his eyes searched my face, waiting for something. I should have rolled my eyes, thrown out a sarcastic remark, but my pulse betrayed me, kicking up in quiet rebellion. "Right now?" I said, keeping my voice even. "A good night's sleep." Bravo's nostrils flared, something between amusement and challenge flickering in his gaze. "We'll see if you get that." I expected him to leave. Instead, he lingered. His gaze flicked over me, assessing, unreadable. There was something about the way he stood there, something too still, too aware, like he was holding himself back. The silence stretched. My skin felt oddly warm. "Anything else?" I finally asked, tilting my head. His jaw flexed, his fingers twitching at his side before he ran a hand through his hair. "Just making sure you're settled." I narrowed my eyes. "Uh-huh. Because you strike me as the nurturing type." Kravos smirked, but it was forced, strained. "Maybe I just enjoy watching you squirm." He stepped back toward the door, but something in the way he moved felt reluctant, as if some invisible force kept pulling him toward me. His hand hovered over the panel, and for a second, I swore he wasn't going to press it. Arya, as always, picked up on my confusion. "Dr. Reynolds, I believe you are witnessing a textbook example of a male experiencing internal conflict. Shall I analyze possible causes?" "No," I hissed under my breath, my cheeks warming. "Understood. Logging this as another moment you will later regret dismissing." I groaned, rubbing my face. By the time I looked up, Kravos was still watching me. Something dark flickered behind his golden eyes, something hungry. He let out a slow breath, muttered something under his breath in a language I didn't understand, and finally, pressed the door panel. The door slid shut between us, locking me inside my quarters. I stood there, staring at it, confusion knotting my stomach. What the hell was that? I let out a breath and flopped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. I was in trouble. The dangerous, infuriatingly attractive males complicating my life kind of trouble. And judging by the warmth still lingering in my chest, it was only going to get worse. Chapter 7. Boundaries and Breaches. I woke to the sound of the door hissing open. Blinking against the dim lighting, I groggily sat up, expecting Kravos' usual brand of smugness. Instead, the silhouette in the doorway sent a very different kind of jolt through me. Galen. He stepped inside, movements precise, controlled. Everything about him was measured, his posture, his gaze, even the way he took in the room, like he was cataloging every detail, filing it away for later analysis. I pushed a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. "You know, Chief, Sanctuary really has a thing for unannounced visits." Arya, ever eager, piped up. "Judging by the state of your hair, I recommend immediate damage control, or just keep the light dim." I exhaled through my nose. "Arya, do us both a favor and mute." Galen's gaze flickered toward me, but if he had an opinion on my ongoing battle with my AI, he kept it to himself. "I trust the accommodations are sufficient." I stretched, rolling out my shoulders. Let's just say it's a major upgrade from a burning escape pod. Something that might have been amusement ghosted across his face before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Good. You'll need to be well rested. I frowned. For what? Galen took a step closer, clasping his hands behind his back. You're not a prisoner here, Maya, but neither are you a guest. That means certain expectations. My breath caught, not because of the words, but because of the way he said my name. No titles, no distance, just Maya. I hadn't realized how much weight that carried until now. I shifted, forcing myself to focus. I figured as much. His silver eyes lingered on me, searching, as if peeling back my defenses. You'll have access to the lab starting tomorrow. If you expect Sanctuary to invest resources into keeping you safe, then you need to prove your expertise is worth it. I nodded, absorbing the words, but the way he was looking at me made it hard to ignore the tension coiling between us. Galen was different from Kravos, quieter in his intensity, but no less powerful. Where Kravos filled a space with his presence, Galen unsettled it, tilting the balance without saying a word. You're serious all the time, aren't you? I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. A slow blink. Excuse me? I bit my lip, debating whether pushing his buttons was a terrible idea. Chief, that kind of intensity has to be exhausting. Ever think about loosening up? He tilted his head, regarding me as if I were a particularly odd experiment. I don't see the benefit. I scoffed. Oh, sure, why enjoy life when you can be broody and intimidating? His expression remained impassive, but something in his stance shifted. Something unreadable. You mistake discipline for detachment. I opened my mouth, but his next words stopped me cold. And you mistake deflection for control. My breath stalled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us stretched tight, charged with something neither of us acknowledged. I wasn't sure if I wanted to challenge him, or step back, before I found out how deep his gaze could cut. Where did you grow up? I blinked. What? Galen studied me with unnerving patience. You said you always wanted to make a difference. Where did that start? I frowned. Earth. Midwest. My parents were both scientists. I spent my childhood surrounded by research papers and lab coats. Siblings? No. I tilted my head. Why the sudden curiosity? Galen's silver gaze didn't waver. Understanding someone's origins provides insight into their motivations. I narrowed my eyes. And you need insight because? He didn't answer, but his gaze flickered. Something that almost looked like possession, though that made no sense. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something else, but then I shrieked as my refresher unit door suddenly slammed open, sending a small flood of shower steam into the room. Arya's voice cut through the chaos, unbothered. Apologies. System calibration error. Definitely not an attempt to disrupt the moment of escalating tension. My face burned. Arya, what the hell? Galen just stared. His gaze flicked to the open refresher, then back to me. Something twitched in his jaw. Was he fighting a laugh? Your AI is unique, he said finally, voice utterly deadpan. I groaned, shoving a hand over my eyes. I swear it's malfunctioning. Arya hummed. Statistical probability suggests otherwise. I wanted to die. Galen flared his nostrils and stepped back toward the door, but before he left, he hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. His silver gaze locked onto mine, something unreadable swirling behind it. Call me Galen. For a male who kept his emotions locked behind an impenetrable wall, this felt significant. My throat went inexplicably dry. How was that more intimate than anything Kravos had thrown my way? I swallowed, schooling my face into something neutral. "All right?" "Galen." Something flickered in his expression, gone too fast to name. He gave a single nod, then turned toward the door. "Get some sleep," Arya hummed. "Based on physiological responses, I recommend either deep breathing exercises or admitting defeat." I threw a pillow at the ceiling. "I hate you, Arya." Galen didn't acknowledge the outburst. He was already gone, leaving me staring after him, my pulse annoyingly off rhythm. I sank back onto the bed, covering my face with both hands. This was bad. Very, very bad. Chapter 8. A Scientist's Work is Never Done. The next morning, at least I assumed it was morning given that space stations weren't exactly known for their sunrises, I woke to an odd sensation thrumming under my skin. It had started the moment I'd crashed into Sanctuary, a low-frequency buzz that intensified whenever Galen or Kravos were nearby. I'd written it off as stress, adrenaline, maybe even mild radiation from my burning escape pod. But now, Arya's voice cut through my thoughts. "Dr. Reynolds, your attempt at rest has been deemed inefficient. You have a visitor. Also, your cortisol levels are elevated and your neural patterns show unusual synchronization with—" "Don't start," I groaned into my pillow. "Let me guess. Tall, broody, and emotionally unavailable. Narrow it down, though I must note that your physiological response to both subjects shows remarkably similar patterns of—" "Arya, I swear. Merely updating your medical profile, the incorporation of Acurai biosignatures into your baseline readings is fascinating." I sat up, rubbing my face. My clothes from yesterday were wrinkled beyond salvation, but before I could dwell on the fact that I hadn't packed anything before fleeing for my life, I spotted a folded set of fresh clothing at the foot of the bed. Sanctuary issued, no doubt. I hesitated, then pulled them on. Practical, form-fitting, and clearly designed for function, the fabric felt odd against my skin, almost reactive, like it was adapting to my body temperature. Another piece of tech I'd have to study later. When I hit the door panel, I half expected Kravos, whose presence always seemed to fill rooms with dangerous charm and barely contained energy. Instead, Galen stood there, arms folded, exuding his usual, "I make the rules here" energy. But something was different. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. His silver eyes tracked my movement, and I watched his nostrils flare slightly, a distinctly Acurai response to the buzzing under my skin intensified. "Up and dressed." "Good," he said, his voice carrying that same underlying tension I'd noticed yesterday. "You're coming with me." I rubbed my temples, trying to ignore how his presence seemed to make the room feel smaller. "Good morning to you, too." "We're past pleasantries," he replied smoothly, but there was an edge to his words. "Your data core is still being analyzed, but I need you to check on something else first." My exhaustion vanished in an instant. "Wait, you're taking me to the lab?" He nodded, and I caught another subtle flare of his nostrils. "I need you to run diagnostics on our systems. There's something bothering me." Arya hummed. "Oh, look at that. Actual trust, though I suspect the Chief's elevated hormone levels might be influencing his decision-making process." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to rip the damn earpiece out as I followed Galen down the hall. The security doors hissed open ahead of us, but the tight knot of irritation in my chest didn't ease. The deeper we went, the more the atmosphere shifted. Sterile, cold, but efficient. A place built for precision, for secrets. When we entered the lab, I nearly stopped in my tracks. It was pristine. Workstations lined with top-tier equipment, holographic interfaces displaying complex sequences I recognized from my work at GI, and storage units humming with power. It wasn't quite the lab I had left behind, but it was close. The neural interface terminals caught my eye immediately. GI had similar ones. the kind that let scientists like me bridge the gap between biological research and digital systems. It's how I'd managed to crack their security while still holding my position as a medical researcher. Galen watched me closely, something flickering behind his silver eyes. Impressed? I scoffed, trying to ignore how the distance between us seemed to crackle with invisible energy. I'll reserve judgment until I see if any of this actually works. He made a sound that was almost approval. Then test it. I was already heading toward the nearest terminal when the doors slid open again. You started without me? Kravos drawled, strolling in like he owned the place. I feel left out. The moment he entered, the air shifted again. That buzz under my skin intensified, like two electromagnetic fields suddenly overlapping. I caught Galen stiffen slightly, his jaw tightening. My breath hitched. Trust me, you weren't missed. Kravos grinned, moving closer to lean against the console. As he passed Galen, something silent seemed to pass between them. A look, a slight incline of their heads. The kind of wordless communication that came from years of working together, or something deeper. Harsh, Maya. The way he said my name sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. And here I was, thinking we were bonding. I turned to Galen, exasperated and trying to ignore the way my pulse jumped. Tell me you didn't invite him here just to irritate me. Galen's expression didn't shift, but there was something almost protective in his stance. Kravos oversees security. If you're accessing our systems, he needs to be here. I sighed, rolling my shoulders before cracking my fingers. The neural interface awaited, its bioelectric sensors already responding to my proximity. This was familiar territory, the blend of organic and digital that had made me valuable to GI in the first place. All right, what system am I working with? Kravos leaned in slightly, his forearm brushing mine. The contact sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with the interface. Not just a system. We need to know if we've got a breach and who's behind it. I frowned, forcing myself to focus on the code scrolling past. Breach? You have proof someone got in? Galen's silver eyes darkened, and he moved closer, bracketing me between them. It's just a hunch, but we've detected unusual data packet transfers in the last 2 cycles. Someone is pulling information from our secured archives. Logs are being wiped before we can trace them. Kravos nodded, his usual playfulness giving way to something sharper. The kind of job that takes inside access. We need to find the leak before they sell us out. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the console as the implications sank in. Do you think this breach is connected to me coming here? Galen exchanged a look with Kravos, something passing between them that made the air feel heavier. We intercepted encrypted transmissions 2 cycles ago, right around the time your escape pod launched. Someone might have known your flight trajectory. A chill settled in my gut, but it wasn't just from the revelation. The 3 of us were too close, the energy between us almost tangible, every breath felt charged. So I led them straight to you. Kravos shrugged, but there was no humor in it. His golden eyes had taken on that predatory gleam I'd noticed before. Maybe they were watching Sanctuary anyway. Either way, we need to lock this down before they get what they came for. Galen nodded, his silver eyes sharp. And you're going to help us figure out how deep this goes. The moment stretched, their proximity making my brain short-circuit. The buzz under my skin had become a steady hum, impossible to ignore. Arya hummed in my ear. Increased heart rate detected. Fascinating hormone cascade. Would you like a list of calming techniques, or should I prepare a detailed analysis of Akurai mating behaviors? I clenched my jaw. I hate you. Kravos smirked, but it wasn't his usual cocky grin. This one was slower, thoughtful, like he was wondering how much of my reaction had to do with the same tension I could see coiled in his muscles. Galen, ever the voice of discipline, cleared his throat, drawing my focus back, but even his voice carried an edge of strain. Maya, we need a full diagnostic of the station's firewalls. If someone has infiltrated our network, we need to find the breach before they use it. That got my attention. I activated the neural interface, letting the familiar sensation of code and biology merging wash over me. Wait, you think GI has someone inside? Galen's gaze was steady, but I caught the way his pupils dilated slightly. Another Ekarai response. That's what you're going to help us find out. I frowned, diving deeper into the system architecture. I can trace anomalies using the neural pathways, but this isn't like the pure biological research I did at GI. Their security was biological at its core. DNA-encoded failsafes, neural pattern recognition. This is different. Kravos arched a brow. You're underselling yourself, Doc. Didn't you crack GI's internal logs to get that data core? I cleared my throat, remembering how I'd used my access to their biotech labs to create a bridge between their organic and digital systems. That was different. I had months to study their infrastructure, to understand how they merged biological and digital security. Galen didn't look convinced. His hand settled on the back of my chair, not quite touching me, but close enough that I could feel his heat. Different or not, your expertise is relevant. You understand both sides of their system. Use that. I sighed and got to work, but Kravos didn't move. He leaned in again, his forearm brushing mine once more. Deliberately. The contact sent another shock through me, and this time, I swore I felt an echo of something. A flash of satisfaction that wasn't mine. Arya hummed. Tension detected. Bioelectric synchronization at 67% and rising. Statistically speaking, one of you will break first. Kravos shot me a lazy grin. My credits are on her. I clenched my jaw, ignoring the warmth creeping up my neck. I swear, Kravos, if you don't give me space. It beat. The console in front of me lit up in angry red warnings, and a shrill alarm blared through the lab. The neural interface sparked, sending feedback through my system that made me gasp. Galen stiffened. What did you do? I glared at the screen. I don't know. I barely touched anything. Arya beeped in a far too smug tone. Correction. You accidentally triggered a high-level security lockdown, though in your defense your neural patterns are currently experiencing significant interference from two very potent Ekarai energy signatures. Kravos burst out laughing, actually laughing. Oh, this is priceless. You hacked into GI's files but can't handle a basic firewall? I gritted my teeth. I am having a very bad morning. Galen exhaled, rubbing his temple. I'll override it. Arya piped up again. Would now be an appropriate time to remind everyone that this was entirely preventable? Also, Dr. Reynolds, your pheromone levels are... I groaned and dropped my forehead to the console. I hate my life. Kravos clapped a hand on my shoulder, but instead of a casual grip, his fingers lingered, pressing just a little too firmly. Heat curled along my spine at the unexpected weight of his touch, and with it came another flash. Hunger, possession, need. You'll love Sanctuary, Doc, he murmured, voice dipping just enough to turn the words into something else entirely. Something darker, more possessive, something that made the buzz under my skin surge into a full-blown current. My breath caught. I turned my head slightly, only to find him watching me, his golden eyes filled with something distinctly predatory, like a hunter who had finally caught sight of his prey. And behind me I felt Galen go perfectly, dangerously still. What had I gotten myself into? Chapter 9. Firewalls and Mixed Signals. 10 minutes into running a diagnostic sweep through the neural interface, I realized something very important. Sanctuary's database security was a flaming pile of garbage. Not just bad, compromised. The bioelectric feedback from the system made my head spin, carrying traces of foreign code that didn't belong. I frowned at the screen, my fingers flying over the console as I combed through the system architecture. The deeper I went, the more the pieces clicked together. The foundation of their security had once been solid, but someone had poked at it, leaving gaping vulnerabilities. These weren't just digital breaches. They carried the distinct signature of GI's hybrid biodigital infiltration protocols. And those weren't accidental. Someone who understood both biological and digital systems had been in here. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. My stomach tightened as another wave of feedback hit me through the interface. But this time, it wasn't from the system. It was from the two males whose presence seemed to fill every corner of the lab with crackling energy. Who the hell set up this firewall? A toddler with a death wish? I muttered, trying to focus through the increasing buzz under my skin. Kravos, who had taken up a far too relaxed position leaning against the wall, arched a brow. His golden eyes tracked my movements with predatory focus. "You wound me, Maya. I personally approve the security measures." I shot him a pitying look, ignoring the way my pulse jumped when he said my name. "Well, I hope you kept the receipt because this is tragic. Your pure digital barriers might as well be paper against GI's bio-enhanced infiltration protocols." Galen, standing on the opposite side of the lab, exhaled. The sound carried a tension I was starting to recognize. "Can you tell what they wanted? What features did they access?" "Not really," I said, eyes still fixed on the data in front of me. The neural interface was feeding me cascading streams of corrupted code, each carrying that distinct biological signature. I can try to comb through, but I can't guarantee I'll find what exactly they were after. GI's biotech doesn't leave traditional digital footprints. Arya's voice chimed in my ear. "Dr. Reynolds, your neural patterns are showing increased synchronization with both Acarai energy signatures in the room. Would you like me to—" "Mute," I hissed, but the damage was done. I felt Kravos shift, his attention sharpening. Galen sighed, but there was something almost like approval in his voice. "Before you do anything else, fix it. Block them out and staunch the leaking." I blinked at him, fighting another wave of dizzying feedback, both from the system and from the increasingly powerful presence of both males. Wow, such faith in my abilities. "What if I was just complaining for fun?" Arya chimed in, despite being muted. "Dr. Reynolds, we both know you complain for fun and still fix things anyway." I rolled my eyes but turned my attention back to the console. "Fine, but I expect at least one compliment when I'm done." I exhaled and sat forward, letting the neural interface sink deeper with my consciousness. "Your security's been compromised," I said, voice grim as biological and digital data streams merged in my mind. "There are traces of past breaches. Someone's been poking holes in your firewall for a while now, using GI's bio-digital hybrid protocols." Galen's expression hardened instantly, and I felt a wave of protective anger that wasn't mine surge through the air. How bad? Systematic, deliberate. This wasn't some lazy hacker taking a peek. This was surgical. They used the same bio-enhanced infiltration methods I helped develop at GI. I swallowed hard. Either you've got someone on the inside with access to their biotech, or they've had remote access long before I got here. Kravos let out a low curse. The sound vibrated through me like a physical touch. How come my guys didn't see it? "Your security was built for standard digital threats, but GI's systems—" I hesitated, remembering the months I'd spent studying their biological security measures. "They don't just hack computers. They create viral codes that merge with organic systems, adapt, evolve. I'm surprised they haven't completely overtaken your network." Galen's jaw flexed. Another surge of foreign emotion. Determination, protectiveness, and something darker washed over me. "Can you fix it?" I cracked my knuckles, trying to ignore how my skin seemed to heat up every time he spoke. "Watch me." I got to work, my fingers moving rapidly as I rewrote segments of code while simultaneously building organic firewalls through the neural interface. This wasn't just about patching digital weaknesses. I had to create hybrid barriers that could recognize and reject GI's biodigital infiltration attempts. Minutes passed, stretching into hours as I combed through every last inch of the system. My eyes burned, my fingers ached, and the constant presence of both males seemed to press against my mind like a physical weight. Finally, the last security measure locked into place, a combination of digital encryption and biological recognition protocols that would adapt and evolve against future threats. Done. I spun in my chair, glaring at the screen. You are now 90% less hackable by both digital and biological means. Kravos moved in, placing a hand on the back of my chair. His proximity sent another jolt through my system, and this time I definitely felt an echo of his satisfaction. And the other 10%? I refused to react to the way he leaned in slightly, though my body hummed with awareness. If someone gets past my hybrid security now, you should probably hire them instead of stopping them. Galen studied me, his silver eyes dark with something that made my pulse race. Not bad. I put a hand to my chest in mock emotion. Careful, Galen, say too many nice things and I might feel valued. Arya, ever the instigator, hummed. Analyzing Chief's behavioral patterns. Ah, yes, he likes you, but would rather be incinerated than admit it. Kravos chuckled, his fingers briefly brushing the back of my neck. The contact sent a spark of heat straight down my spine, along with a flash of hunger that definitely wasn't mine. I'm starting to like your AI. Don't encourage her. Before he could respond, the door hissed open. A lanky male in Sanctuary's uniform strode inside, tension radiating off him. His sharp eyes darted between us, and the name tag on his chest read, Lazga. Boss, we've got a problem. Kravos straightened, his usual easygoing demeanor vanishing. The sudden shift in his energy made my head spin. What kind of problem? Lasco exhaled sharply. It's the data core. The moment I connected it to the station's network, the whole system went haywire. We can't access anything inside of it. The floor beneath me felt like it dropped away. What? I shot to my feet, pulse hammering. That's impossible. I triple encrypted that thing before I left. Laska held up his hands. I don't know what to tell you, Doc. The second we tried decrypting it, the system overloaded. I barely managed to shut it down before it did more damage. I shoved past Kravos and Galen, my fingers flying over the console as I reactivated the neural interface. Every ounce of my frustration and fear funneled into my work as I scanned the system for anomalies. The feedback hit me hard. Waves of corrupted code carrying that same biological signature I'd just purged from their system. My breath caught as the screen filled with scrolling data. There it was. A virus, sophisticated, ruthless, and embedded deep within the firewall I had just reinforced. But this wasn't just code. It was a hybrid entity, capable of merging with both organic and digital systems. And it had been waiting. Son of a... My hands shook as I stared at the corrupted data streams. This isn't just system access. They didn't just get in. They recreated my entire protocol, the same biological security measures I developed for the Nixara project. Galen moved closer, his presence steady but urgent. Explain. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration making my voice sharp. The Nixara protocol wasn't just about medical regeneration. The breakthrough was how we merged biological and digital systems, living code that could adapt, evolve, protect itself. I designed the security protocols to keep the research safe, to make sure it could only be used to heal. The bitterness in my laugh surprised even me, but they twisted it, just like they twisted everything else. They took my security protocols and turned them into weapons, and now... I gestured at the screen where the hybrid virus was spreading through the data core. They're using my own creation to destroy the evidence of their crimes. Kravos's anger rolled through the room in waves. But why let you escape with it in the first place? Because they wanted to know who I'd run to. The realization hit me hard. They knew I'd try to expose them. So they let me take the data core, knowing their virus would corrupt not just the evidence, but any system I tried to use to decrypt it. My fingers clenched on the console. They're not just covering their tracks. They're marking anyone who tries to help me as a target. The double breach, Galen said, his silver eyes darkening with understanding. "They compromised our system before you arrived, but the data core carried a second wave of infiltration." I nodded grimly. A failsafe. If the first breach didn't give them what they wanted, the virus in the data core would finish the job. "And I led it right to you." The weight of guilt pressed against my chest. Everything I'd done to expose GI's human trials, their illegal experiments, their abuse of the Nixara protocol, all of it had just put more people at risk. "This isn't on you," Kravos said, his voice carrying an edge of fierce protection that made my pulse jump. "They're the ones who turned healing into a weapon." He's right. Galen's steady presence anchored me as another wave of feedback hit. "But we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. What else did they corrupt?" Chapter 10. Trust is a four-letter word. The lab was too quiet. I sat stiffly at the console, fingers hovering over the keyboard, while the neural interface hummed against my temples. The hybrid virus was still spreading through the data core, using my own protocols against me. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't so infuriating. "So," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. "This is what karma feels like." Arya chimed in helpfully. "Actually, this is what poor life choices feel like. Would you like me to compile a list of your questionable decisions, ranked by catastrophic outcome?" "I hate you." Noted, adding that to the list. Galen had stormed off to make preparations, leaving me alone with Kravos, who was doing a terrible job of pretending he wasn't watching me. "You know," I said, still typing, "for someone who's supposed to be intimidating, you're about as subtle as a plasma explosion." Kravos chuckled, leaning against the edge of the workstation. "Who says I'm trying to be subtle?" I rolled my eyes, focusing on the code sprawled across the screen. The virus was elegant in its destruction, I had to give them that. It was using the same biological patterns I'd designed to protect the Nixara protocol, but twisted into something malicious. "You're brooding," Kravos observed. "I'm working." "You're brooding while working. It's very dramatic. Very tortured scientist dealing with her creation being used for evil." I shot him a glare. "Aren't you supposed to be helping Galen prepare?" "He told me to watch you." I'm pretty sure he didn't mean literally. Kravos' smirk widened. "You sure about that? Because the way he looks at you—" "Do not," I warned, pointing my stylus at him, "finish that sentence." Arya, because of course she would, chose that moment to pipe up. "Dr. Reynolds, your heart rate escalates by approximately 23.4% whenever either male is in close proximity. Would you like me to graph the correlation between their presence and your physiological responses?" I groaned. "Arya, what part of mute do you not understand?" "The part where you actually mean it." Kravos laughed, the sound warm and entirely too knowing. He pushed off the desk and circled behind me, his presence pressing against my senses like a storm rolling in. "You know what your problem is?" I swallowed, my hands stilling on the keyboard as that now familiar buzz intensified. "My homicidal AI? Besides that," his voice dipped lower, smooth as dark velvet, "you think you have to carry all of this alone. The virus, the corruption, the weight of what GI did to your work. You're taking it all on yourself." I turned my head just enough to meet his gaze, my breath catching at his proximity. "I appreciate the concern, but—" "Not concern, princess." His fingers ghosted along the side of my arm, deliberate, teasing. A flash of his emotions, amusement, hunger, protectiveness, surged through the contact. Investment. Heat curled up my spine, completely uninvited. "Kravos." "Tell me something," he interrupted, his golden eyes darkening. "When was the last time you let someone fight beside you? Not for you." Beside you. The question hit harder than I expected, because the truth was, I couldn't remember. And as I stared at the corrupted data streaming across my screen, at the evidence of how GI had twisted my work, A certainty settled in my chest. There's only one way to fix this. The words left my mouth just as the lab door slid open. Galen stood there, his silver eyes sharp, and something in my tone must have given me away because both males went instantly alert. "No," Galen said, waves of denial and protectiveness rolling off him. Kravos's hands tightened on my chair. "Absolutely not." I squared my shoulders. "I need to go back." Galen's expression hardened, his silver eyes burning. The force of his emotion almost staggered me. "You are not setting foot inside GI again." I exhaled sharply. "Galen, I know their systems. I know their security flaws. I'm the one who helped build them. The only way to get that data back is from inside." Kravos spun my chair to face him, his usual playfulness nowhere to be found. His presence crashed over me like a wave, full of possession and fear. "You barely made it out alive the first time. What makes you think they won't lock you down the second you step back in?" Arya, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Dr. Reynolds, I am obligated to remind you that running into a burning building is statistically unwise. Also, your neural synchronization with both males has reached critical levels. Shall I describe the biological implications of—" "Not now, Arya." All three of us snapped in unison. I swallowed, fighting against the tide of their combined emotions. They won't expect me to come back. They think their virus worked. That I'm running scared, that the evidence is lost. They won't be ready for us to turn their own protocols against them. Galen raked a hand through his hair, exhaling harshly. Kravos clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists before releasing. Neither of them liked this, but they knew, just as I did, that I was right. Galen's voice cut through my scrambling thoughts, carrying an edge that settled in my bones. "Then we're going with you." My breath caught. "What?" Galen's jaw tightened, his silver eyes blazing with something dangerously resolute. The force of his determination hit me like a physical blow. "If you're going back, you're not going alone." Kravos let out a slow exhale, raking a hand through his hair before stepping forward, his body radiating heat and purpose. "You think we're just going to let you walk into that hellhole alone? Not happening, Doc." I shook my head, frustration warring with something dangerously close to relief. Their emotions tangled with mine, making it hard to think straight. "This isn't your fight." Kravos scoffed, cutting me off. His next words carried a possessive weight that made my knees weak. "Like hell it isn't. You're under Sanctuary's protection, Maya. That means you're ours to look after." The word ours sent another jolt through my system, and I caught both males stiffen slightly. They'd felt it too. Arya hummed thoughtfully. "Fascinating. Should I start compiling research on Akurai mating behaviors, or would that ruin the moment?" I groaned, but before I could tell her exactly where to file that research, Galen stepped closer, his steady presence pressed against my fraying nerves as he spoke. "You don't have to do this alone, and you won't." I opened my mouth to argue, but Kravos tipped his head, a slow smirk curving his lips. "Face it, princess. You're stuck with us." I let out a shaky breath, heart hammering as I looked between them. Every instinct screamed at me to push back, to remind them I could handle myself. But the way they stood, protective, unwavering, left no room for negotiation. "Fine," I said finally, "but we do this my way." Galen's lips twitched. "Of course." "Wouldn't dream of anything else," Kravos added, but his smirk said otherwise. Arya chimed in one last time. "Excellent. Shall I start planning the Infiltrating Your Evil Former Employer party? I have several playlists prepared for various scenarios, ranging from daring escape to dramatic confrontation." I dropped my head into my hands. Why is this my life? But as both males moved to start planning, their presence steady and sure around me, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this fight as I thought. Chapter 11. breaking, entering, and other terrible ideas. Maya's right about the entry points, Galen said, studying the facility schematics we'd pulled up. We'll need to bypass their bio-digital security entirely, find a way in that doesn't trigger their systems. Kravos nodded, still standing closer to me than strictly necessary. I've got some contacts who might have updated layouts of their maintenance systems. Do it now, Galen ordered. We need those plans before we can move forward. On it. Kravos pulled out his comm unit but paused to give me a look that made my skin tingle. Try not to miss me too much, Doc. I rolled my eyes, but my pulse betrayed me by jumping when his arm brushed mine as he left. The door hissed shut behind him, and suddenly the lab felt both larger and more intimate with just Galen and me. Arya, I said quickly, needing to break the tension, pull up the latest security scans of... Dr. Reynolds, Arya interrupted. Your heart rate has increased by 23% in the last 30 seconds. Shall I compile a list of potential causes, or would you prefer to continue pretending you're not affected by both males' presence? I gritted my teeth. I will donate you to a children's coding class. Noted. Initiating Romance Protocol Alpha 3. You do not have a romance protocol. I do now. Would you like to hear the soundtrack I've prepared? It's very dramatic. Galen hadn't moved, but something in his posture had shifted. The careful distance he usually maintained seemed to evaporate as he stepped closer. Maya. The way he said my name sent shivers down my spine. We should focus on the plans, I said quickly, turning back to the console. The maintenance tunnels might... Look at me. I swallowed hard but turned. His silver eyes held mine, and the intensity in them made my breath catch. You feel it, he said quietly. The pull. The way it gets stronger every time we're close. My heart thundered against my ribs. That's not... I exhaled sharply. I can't feel this way. Not about both of you. It isn't normal. Normal? His lips curved slightly. For humans, maybe. Understanding clicked. But for Akurai, we mate in triads. His voice dropped lower as he stepped closer. The bond forms between all three. It's how we're made. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time I'd been fighting it, feeling guilty, confused, thinking something was wrong with me for wanting both of them. But for them, this was natural. Expected. Why didn't you tell me? You needed to feel it for yourself. His hand came up to cup my cheek, and the contact sent sparks through my system. To understand that this isn't just attraction. It's completion. I leaned into his touch without meaning to, the bond humming between us like a live wire. Galen. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful, it was pure need, an unleashing of everything he'd been holding back. His hands framed my face like I was something precious, even as his mouth claimed mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. Heat unfurled in my stomach, spreading fast. My fingers curled into his shirt, gripping like he was the only solid thing in a galaxy that wouldn't stop spinning. The bond between us flared bright and hot, his emotions crashing into mine. Possession, protection, need. When he finally pulled back, it was only far enough to rest his forehead against mine. We'll figure this out. The door chimed and Kravos's voice came through the comm. Got those plans? You two decent in there? I jumped back, guilt flooding me, until I caught the amusement in his tone. Of course. If this was normal for them... The door opened and Kravos strolled in, his golden eyes taking in my flushed face and Galen's proximity. But instead of jealousy or anger, his expression held only heat and satisfaction. Don't stop on my account, he said, his voice a low purr that made my stomach flip. Though I think it's only fair. He moved faster than I expected, suddenly right in front of me. Where Galen's kiss had been claiming, Kravos was pure seduction. His mouth moved against mine with practiced skill, teasing and demanding all at once. His fingers tangled in my hair as he deepened the kiss, and I melted into him, the bond singing between us just as strongly as it had with Galen. When he pulled back, his golden eyes were dark with satisfaction. There. Now we're even. Arya's voice was entirely too smug. Romance Protocol Alpha 3 complete. Initiating Protocol Beta. Now, kiss each other. Arya, I yelped, mortified. Kravos laughed. Even Galen's lips twitched. I stood between them, still catching my breath from 2 earth-shattering kisses. The guilt and confusion that had plagued me began to fade, replaced by something warmer, steadier. This wasn't wrong. It wasn't a mistake. It was exactly how it was supposed to be. Now, Kravos said, pulling up the plans he'd acquired, about those maintenance tunnels. I tried to focus on the schematics, but my mind kept drifting to the way they both watched me, like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. The mission ahead was impossible, maybe suicidal. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I wasn't sure which terrified me more. Breaking into Galactic Innovations, or accepting that I was falling completely, irrevocably, in love with both of them. Arya hummed thoughtfully. Don't worry, Dr. Reynolds. According to my calculations, you're already past the point of no return on that second one. For once, I didn't argue, because deep down I knew she was right. Chapter 12. The worst possible way to infiltrate a corporation. 3 days. That's how long it took us to plan the infiltration, gather intel, and for me to completely fail at pretending those kisses hadn't changed everything. 3 days of mission prep, stolen glances, and trying to get used to feeling 2 other people's emotions in my head. Oh, and learning how to wear tactical gear. That last part wasn't going so well. This is disgusting, I muttered, shifting in the knee-deep sludge after my tactical suit's waste repulsion field had shorted out exactly 2 minutes into our trek. The super-advanced gear Galen had insisted I wear now felt like a wetsuit designed by a sadist. For the record, when you said protective gear, I assumed it would, protect. The specifications were perfect, Galen said, his own suit working flawlessly because of course it was. Through our new bond, I could feel his mix of concern and exasperation. Something must have interfered with the field generator. Oh, I can tell you exactly what interfered with it, I growled, trying not to think about what was seeping into my boots. Corporate sabotage. This entire tunnel is designed to ruin people's days. Arya chimed in helpfully. Actually, the probability of deliberate sabotage is quite low. However, the probability of you having cosmically bad luck is statistically significant. Would you like me to calculate exactly how unlikely this suit malfunction is? The numbers are quite entertaining. Kravos, waiting ahead of me in his equally pristine suit, shot a grin over his shoulder. Look on the bright side, Doc. At least you're only half soaked. As if on cue, something in my suit made a sad little beep and another section of the protection field failed. You were saying? Fascinating, Arya noted. Your suit appears to be failing in the exact pattern of my predicted catastrophe curve. Should I start a betting pool on which section fails next? I felt a wave of protective concern wash through the bond from both males. Galen's was sharp and focused, while Kravos's came with an undercurrent of amusement that made me want to splash him. The interference might be from the biodigital signals, I said, trying to focus on the mission instead of how my suit was slowly betraying me. GI's hybrid virus could be affecting the suit's systems the same way it corrupted their security protocols. Galen's attention sharpened. Could they detect us through it? No, the virus isn't designed to... Another section of my suit failed spectacularly, sending a wave of something unspeakable over my shoulder. Oh, come on! Kravos chuckled, but I felt his concern spike through the bond. Need me to carry you, princess? Touch me right now and you'll be wearing this sludge, too. You are touchy today. Galen raised a fist, signaling us to stop. The air in the tunnel changed, subtle, but enough to make my skin prickle. He activated a small holodisc, scanning the junction ahead. They've increased security, he murmured, patrol drones sweeping every 3 minutes. I exhaled sharply, trying to ignore how my now mostly failed tactical suit was making squishing noises. Great. And how, exactly, do we plan to get past them? Because I don't think I can hack a drone while marinating in corporate sewage. Kravos smirked. Good news, Doc. You don't have to. We're taking the air vents. I blinked at him. You mean the cramped, poorly ventilated tunnels designed for maintenance droids? Unless you've suddenly developed the ability to turn invisible, yeah. I turned to Galen, hoping for a voice of reason. Tell me there's another option. There isn't. But through the bond, I felt his reluctance to put me in any more discomfort. It was oddly touching. Arya hummed thoughtfully. On the bright side, Dr. Reynolds, the ventilation system might actually improve your current odor situation, though I should note that crawling through vents while experiencing elevated hormone levels due to your new mate bond could lead to some interesting... Arya, I swear. Muting, though I feel compelled to point out that your pheromone levels suggest... Mute. Kravos boosted himself up first, prying open the vent panel with practiced ease. He turned, extending a hand to me. Up you go, princess. Try not to drip on anything important. I narrowed my eyes but took his hand, letting him lift me effortlessly. The contact sent sparks through the bond, his desire to protect warring with appreciation for how I looked, even covered in muck. I wriggled into the tight space, grumbling as my compromised suit smeared against the metallic walls. Galen followed, sealing the vent behind us. The air was thick, stale, and far too warm for comfort, and now we were pressed close together in a space definitely not designed for 3 people. This is fine, I muttered, crawling forward. This is totally fine. Just 3 people, 2 of whom I've kissed in the last 72 hours, crammed together in a glorified metal coffin. What could possibly go wrong? Arya hummed. Would you like a list? No. The crawl space forced me between both males. Kravos ahead, Galen behind. Heat radiated off them, their steady breathing the only sound beyond the distant hum of security systems. The bond hummed between us, making me hyper-aware of every point of contact. Kravos glanced back, amusement flickering in his expression and through our connection. Comfy? I glared. I will bite you. His grin widened. Oh? Promises, promises. Galen exhaled through his nose. Both of you, focus. But I felt his spike of interest at the exchange. We crawled in silence until we reached a grated opening overlooking a secured hallway. I wiped sweat from my forehead, trying not to think about the very close proximity of both males. Then Galen's voice, low and controlled, murmured in my ear. Time to move. Shivers shot down my spine. I hated how my body reacted to both of them. It was infuriating. And wonderful. And terrifying. Kravos kicked the vent open, dropping down soundlessly. He motioned for me to follow. I moved to climb down, only for my compromised suit to catch on a loose panel. I yelped. Strong arms caught me mid-fall, pulling me against a very firm chest. Kravos smirked down at me, his grip secure. Careful, Doc. Wouldn't want you getting hurt. My face was inches from his. His eyes gleamed with something unmistakable. Desire, protectiveness, need. The air crackled. I could feel his breath warm against my cheek, and his emotions through the bond. Amusement, hunger, and a depth of caring that made my chest tight. Then Galen landed beside us with a soft thud, and another wave of emotions hit me. His quiet intensity, his own need, his determination to keep us both safe. We don't have time for distractions, he said, his silver eyes locking onto mine. I tore myself from Kravos's grip, ignoring the way my skin tingled and the bond sang. Right, Let's get this over with. Kravos's smirk lingered as we moved into the shadows. You know, he whispered, for someone covered in waste tunnel residue, you're still remarkably— Finish that sentence, I hissed, and I will find a way to short out your suit too. His laughter echoed through the bond, warm and rich. Even Galen's amusement flickered through our connection. And as we slipped deeper into the heart of Galactic Innovations, I realized something dangerous. I was in love with both of them. And based on how the bond practically purred between us, they knew it too. Chapter 13. Getting in trouble is an art. Security was tighter than expected. Not impossible, but enough to make my stomach churn. The facility's hallways were sleek, pristine, and brimming with hidden defenses that screamed instant disintegration if we tripped the wrong sensor. My compromised suit made a sad squishing noise with each careful step. Area hummed in my ear. Your current Oda sewage is actually providing excellent sensor camouflage. The system appears to be registering you as maintenance waste, though I feel compelled to note that your pheromone levels are somehow still detectable through the interesting aroma. Not now, Aria. Galen crouched beside a control panel, his jaw tight as he scanned the security feed. Through our new bond, I felt his laser focus, his constant awareness of every threat, and underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that made my breath catch. But there was something else, too, a heat that had been building since that first kiss in the lab. 2 guards at the end of this corridor, he said. Voice low. Kravos, are you still carrying those quiet knives? Kravos twirled a blade between his fingers before catching it with practiced ease. Always. His golden eyes flickered to me, and through the bond came a surge of possessive determination that matched Galen's. Stay behind us, princess. I scoffed. Excuse me? They moved like shadows, the bond between us humming with lethal grace. One moment they were beside me, the next they ghosted down the corridor. A second later, the guards crumpled silently to the floor. I blinked. That was disturbingly efficient. Kravos sheathed his knife and threw me a look that was far too heated for a stealth mission. We aim to impress, Doc. We moved deeper into the facility, tension crackling between us. The bond wasn't helping. Every surge of adrenaline seemed to amplify the awareness between us, making me hyper-conscious of their movements, their proximity, the way they instinctively positioned themselves to shield me. The proof is here, I whispered as we approached a heavily secured door. Records of every trial, every subject I swallowed hard, memories of discovering those files flooding back. Every person they sacrificed for profit. Galen's anger flashed through the bond, quickly controlled but fierce. Kravos' emotions mirrored his, though tinged with his characteristic humor. Then let's make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monsters they are. I tapped into a nearby console, initiating a neural link. The familiar sensation of code merged with biology washed over me. I can bypass their security, but— A wave of protective alarm hit me through the bond just as Galen's hand closed around my wrist. Gods, he breathed against my ear. The only cover was a narrow maintenance alcove. We pressed into it, my back against the cold wall, both males crowding close. Too close. The bond surged between us, their combined emotions hitting me like a physical wave. Well, Aria chimed helpfully, your heart rate suggests this is either mortal terror or extreme arousal. Would you like me to specify which? The space was impossibly tight, forcing us chest to back to chest. Every breath brought their scents, Galen's clean, crisp essence and Kravos' warmer, spicier tone, somehow cutting through even my suit's sewage situation. The bond sang between us, and I felt their dual need to protect warring with something darker, hungrier. The guards passed, their footsteps fading, but none of us moved. My pulse thundered in my ears. Kravos' breath ghosted across my neck, sending shivers down my spine. Galen's hand still circled my wrist, his thumb brushing my pulse point in a way that seemed unconscious but made heat pool in my stomach. "Clear," I managed, my voice embarrassingly breathy. "Is it?" Kravos murmured, and through the bond came a flash of how much he wanted to kiss me right then. Corporate espionage be damned. Galen's desire echoed his, but tempered with iron control. "Focus," he said, though his grip tightened briefly before releasing me. "The mission comes first." We slipped into an empty server room, needing a moment to regroup and access the mainframe. The second the door closed behind us, something in the air shifted. The bond thrummed with 3 days' worth of denied attraction, amplified by adrenaline and the very real possibility we might not make it out. "Maya," Galen started, his usual control fracturing. I didn't let him finish. Maybe it was the danger, maybe it was the bond, but I turned and kissed him, hard. He made a sound of surprise that quickly turned into a growl as he backed me against the server bank. His mouth claimed mine with devastating intensity, all that careful restraint finally snapping. Then Kravos was there too, his hand sliding into my hair as Galen broke away. "My turn," he murmured, and kissed me with the kind of skill that made my knees weak. Where Galen was controlled power, Kravos was pure liquid heat. The bond blazed between us, emotions tangling until I couldn't tell where mine ended and theirs began. Want, need, possession, protection, it all swirled together into something overwhelming. Arya's voice cut through the haze. "While I hate to interrupt what promises to be a fascinating demonstration of interspecies mating behaviors, you should know that your suit's latest malfunction is about to—" The facility's lights suddenly flared red. "Trigger every biosensor in the facility," she finished cheerfully. "Also, Dr. Reynolds, I feel compelled to note that your current odor somehow hasn't deterred their obvious interest. Fascinating data point." Alarms blared. Through the bond, I felt both males' protective instincts surge into overdrive, though tinged now with frustration at the interruption. "The files," I gasped, forcing myself to focus. My lips still tingled from their kisses as I turned to the console. "We need—" "Everything," Galen ordered, already moving to cover the door. His voice was rougher than usual. "Get everything." I worked fast, copying files, breaking encryption, retrieving every damning piece of evidence I'd discovered before fleeing. This was what I'd come for. This was what would bring them down. Plasma fire erupted in the corridor outside. "Time to go, sweetheart," Kravos called, weapons ready. I yanked the data core free, clutching it tight. Got it. Every record, every trial, every death they tried to hide. "Then run," Galen said, and I caught the worry in his silver eyes. We sprinted through the facility's winding corridors, alarms shrieking around us. The bond hummed with shared purpose, shared determination, and something deeper growing stronger with each passing moment. "You know," Arya mused as we ran, "I don't think this is what they meant by explosive chemistry, though your hormone levels suggest—" "Arya." "What?" "I'm merely noting that despite your current ode to sewage, you've managed to attract not one but 2 highly eligible—" "If we survive this," I panted, "I'm reprogramming you into a toaster." "Noted. May I suggest focusing on escape first, romance second, and threats to my existence third?" For once she had a point, but based on how the bond thrummed between us, filled with promise and possession and need, I had a feeling the romance part of that equation wasn't going to wait very long. Assuming we survived the next 5 minutes. Chapter 14. Escape Velocity. My pulse thundered in my ears as we raced through the facility, alarms blaring around us, plasma fire erupted behind us, cutting off our escape route. "Well," I panted, "this is going about as well as expected." "You say that like we're in trouble," Kravos said, eyes glinting with mischief that froze the hairs on the back of my neck. Galen scanned our surroundings, ever practical. "We're cut off." I clutched the data core tight. Suggestions? Kravos tilted his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. Oh, you're gonna love this one. Aria, I muttered. On a scale of terrible to catastrophic, how bad is whatever Kravos is about to suggest? Error, scale insufficient for evaluation. Before I could protest, Kravos pulled something from his belt. A small, round device. Then he tossed it against the far wall and blew it open. The blast sent us stumbling. Through the smoke I saw the hangar bay beyond the rubble. I turned to Kravos, furious. Are you insane? He tossed me a wink. Absolutely. Now run! Before I could strangle him, Galen grabbed my wrist and pulled. Run! We sprinted through the newly created exit, my suit making sad squishing noises with each step. Your exit strategy lacks subtlety, Aria noted, and walls. Not helping, I gasped as we burst into the hangar. Docked transports lined the far end, and there, gleaming under the emergency lights, sat GI's newest prototype. Fast, heavily shielded, and equipped with every security measure I'd helped design. That one, I pointed. I know its systems. Galen's eyes narrowed. Can you overwrite it? I helped write its security protocols. Just get me to the console. Guards flooded into the hangar behind us. Plasma fire erupted as Kravos and Galen provided cover. Breaking and entering again? Aria asked as my fingers flew over the access panel. Because I feel compelled to point out that stealing corporate property usually requires advanced paperwork. Not now. The security was intricate, biometric scanners layered with neural pattern recognition, but I knew the back doors. I'd built them. We need that ship now, Maya, Kravos called, returning fire. Almost. Got it. The hatch hissed open just as another volley of plasma fire scorched the wall beside us. In, Galen ordered, laying down covering fire as Kravos and I dove inside. I automatically moved toward the pilot's seat, but Aria's voice cut in sharply. Dr. Reynolds, need I remind you of your last attempt at piloting? The escape pod is still on fire. I got us here, didn't I? If by got us here you mean created a flaming spectacle visible from 3 systems away, then yes. Galen smoothly took the pilot's controls while I focused on the security console. I'll fly. You keep their protocols from locking us out. Good call, Kravos added from weapons. Let's avoid setting this one on fire too. I would have argued, but he had a point. My fingers flew over the interface instead, keeping GI's systems from shutting us down. This I could do. They're scrambling pursuit ships, Galen reported. We can't lead them back to Sanctuary, I said, bypassing another security lockout. Not with their virus still in the station's systems. And they're definitely tracking us, Kravos added. Ideas? Galen's jaw tightened. I know a place. Abandoned outpost in the Tartarus asteroid cluster. We can lose them in the debris field. Tartarus? I asked, still fighting GI's protocols. Isn't that basically a navigational death trap? Exactly. His silver eyes met mine briefly. Think you can keep their systems off us long enough to get there? I grinned, feeling the security matrices respond to my commands. Watch me. Just maybe don't let me near the flight controls. An excellent life choice, Aria noted. I'm adding self-awareness to your file. The transport ripped through closing blast doors, metal screeching as we squeezed through by inches. Warning lights flashed, but we hit open sky. Then the sensors lit up. Guys, Kravos called. We've got company. 3 GI pursuit ships locked onto our trajectory. I assumed this wasn't part of the plan, Aria asked. I can lose them in the asteroid field, Galen said, hands flying over the controls, but we'll need a diversion. Leave it to me, Kravos said, strapping in. Maya, keep their systems blind. I dove deeper into the ship's security architecture, blocking their tracking protocols. Working on it, just don't let them hit us. Your confidence is touching, Aria commented. Though statistically you are a better scientist than you are a pilot. A warning siren shrieked. "Missile lock!" "They're gonna fire!" I shouted, frantically scrambling their targeting systems. "Then we'd better make this count." Kravos slammed the trigger. Our plasma fire streaked out, catching the nearest pursuit ship. The explosion rocked us into a wild spin. Galen swore, fighting for control. "Hold on!" Another alarm. "Second missile incoming." "Jumping in 3, 2, Arya began. The missile closed in. 1. The stars stretched and twisted as we tore into hyperspace. The cockpit flared white. Then silence. I slumped back, heart still racing. "That was awesome," Kravos suggested. "Reckless," Galen corrected. "I was going to say close," I muttered. Arya hummed thoughtfully. "I'm adding magnetically attracted to trouble to all your files." Kravos laughed. Even Galen's lips twitched slightly. "I can't believe we made it out of there," I breathed out. Arya let out an exaggerated sigh. "And yet, my processors continue to suffer. This has been the most distressing 2 hours of my existence." "Congratulations." It felt like we, Arya and I, had finally found where we belonged. "Also," Arya added, "you're still dripping sewage on the floor." "Well, I found it. I wasn't so sure about my nosy AI." Chapter 15. Close Quarters. The stolen transport rattled as we crossed into the outer atmosphere of the asteroid cluster, the engines straining under Galen's careful control. After everything, the alarms, the firefight, the chase, the silence felt deafening. "Status update," Arya announced. "We are no longer in immediate danger of dying. However, I must note the structural integrity of this outpost appears questionable." Through the viewport, I could see what she meant. The safe house was an abandoned outpost tucked deep within the asteroid field, its metal hull scarred by years of debris impacts. Not exactly 5-star accommodation, but right now, it was the safest place in the galaxy. "Better than a burning escape pod," I muttered. "A remarkably low bar," Arya replied. "Though given your track record with vehicles?" Kravos chuckled from the co-pilot's chair. "Never doubted us for a second." Galen shot him a look, silver eyes sharp even after everything we'd just survived. "Liar." I exhaled slowly, trying to ignore how my ruined suit had basically fused to my skin. "Please tell me this place has a functional shower." "Refresher unit should still work," Galen said, fingers dancing over the landing controls. "But given how long this place has been abandoned..." "I don't care if it's solar-powered. I refuse to spend another minute smelling like corporate waste." The outpost's docking clamps engaged with a groan. A single room dominated the space beyond, old monitoring equipment lining the walls, a small refresher unit in the corner, and what looked like 2 worn sleep pods converted into makeshift beds against the far wall. The moment we stepped inside, exhaustion hit me. My legs trembled, the aftermath of adrenaline making every muscle ache. But it wasn't just physical tiredness weighing me down. The data core felt heavy in my hands. Heavy with evidence that could destroy GI, but also with the knowledge that I'd dragged Galen and Kravos into my fight. Arya hummed softly. "While I hate to interrupt what promises to be an excellent brooding session, might I suggest immediate decontamination? My sensors indicate your current state is concerning." Kravos smirked, though I noticed he was carefully holding his own soiled outer gear away from his body. Even exhausted and filthy, he managed to exude that dangerous charm that made my pulse skip. "What? The ode of sewage isn't growing on you?" "I am 1 second away from committing actual violence." "The refresher unit is yours," Galen said, his voice carrying that underlying protectiveness that had been growing stronger since our kiss in the lab. "We'll take turns." I didn't waste time arguing. I grabbed the spare clothes Galen had thought to bring and locked myself in the small refresher unit. The second the water hit my skin, I nearly cried in relief, but alone with my thoughts, everything we'd done, everything we'd risked, came crashing down. "Arya," I whispered, letting my head rest against the wall. "What have I done? If GI traces us here..." "Analyzing potential catastrophic outcomes seems counterproductive at this juncture," Arya replied, her tone gentler than usual, "though I note both males were fully aware of the risks when they chose to help you. Chose to help me steal corporate secrets and blow up half a facility. Actually, Kravos did most of the exploding. You merely provided the motivation." I managed a weak laugh, but my chest felt tight. Through the door I could hear them moving around the outpost, both of them protecting me, even now. When I finally stepped out, wrapped in clean clothes that smelled faintly of some alien detergent, Kravos was waiting for his turn. He'd stripped off his outer layers, and the sight of him made my breath catch, not just because of his obvious physical appeal, but because of the way he looked at me. Like I was something precious he'd fight to keep safe. "You clean up nice, Doc," he said, but the usual teasing in his voice was softened by something deeper. "Go decontaminate yourself before I set you on fire." His hand brushed past me on his way to the refresher, and he stopped at the door. His gaze snapped back to Galen, and something passed between them. His casual touch sent sparks across my skin, and my stomach fluttered. The same sparks I'd felt when he kissed me, when Galen kissed me. This bond kept growing stronger, and I was past the point of denying it. I wanted them. I wanted this connection. "All clear so far," Galen reported, then nodded to Kravos. "Take the refresher. I'll finish the system check." "What, no lords and ladies first for the chief?" Kravos smirked, though he was already closing the unit door. "Someone needs to maintain security," Galen replied evenly. I sank onto one of the makeshift beds, the events of the day crashing over me now that I had a moment to breathe. The sound of the refresher unit running provided an oddly comforting background noise as I tried to process everything that had happened. Kravos emerged looking significantly more like a person, his usual dangerous grace somehow enhanced by being clean. He caught my eye and smiled. Not his usual smirk, but something softer. Only then did Galen finally head for the refresher, his movements controlled and efficient, even in exhaustion. I must have started to drift sitting up because the next thing I knew, Galen was kneeling in front of me, clean and close enough that his unique scent, crisp and oddly metallic, purely acari, made my pulse jump. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see..." I swallowed hard. "If they find us here, if they hurt either of you because of me..." Maya. The way he said my name made something in my chest tighten. "We knew the risks. We chose this. Chose you." The intensity in his silver eyes made my heart stutter. "Why?" "You know why." His voice dropped lower, making me shiver. "You feel it too, the bond. The way it pulls us together." "I've been fighting it," I admitted, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I couldn't possibly feel this way about both of you. "And now?" I met his gaze, finally letting myself acknowledge the truth. "Now? I'm terrified. Not of the bond, but of losing you. Either of you." Kravos moved closer, his presence warm and steady behind me. "I'm glad you stopped fighting it, sweetheart." "Oh, don't flatter yourself," I teased. But there was no heat in it. Because he was right. Because maybe I was tired of fighting this pull between us. Because maybe, just maybe, what terrified me most wasn't the bond itself. It was how right it felt. "Sleep," Galen said, his thumb brushing my cheek in a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "We'll take turns watching." "No," I caught his hand. "Stay, both of you." Kravos settled on one side of me while Galen took the other. Their warmth, their presence, wrapped around me like a shield against everything we still had to face. "You are ours," Kravos, murmured against my hair. And for the first time since I'd stolen that data core and escaped GI, I let myself sink into their embrace. No fear, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty that they were mine. Both of them. These Akurai warriors belonged to me as much as I belonged to them. Arya's voice murmured in my ear, gentle yet absolute. Systems secure. Perimeter clear. A brief pause. Sleep well, Dr. Reynolds. I sighed, my body cocooned in their strength, their warmth, their unmistakable scent. Tonight, I stopped running. Tonight, I surrendered to what my heart had known all along. Chapter 16. Lessons in Bond Chemistry. I woke to warmth and the distinct sensation of being perfectly, safely surrounded. The outpost's dim emergency lighting cast everything in soft shadows, but I felt them more than saw them. Kravos' steady heartbeat against my back, Galen's gentle breaths warming my skin. The bond hummed between us, no longer just a pull but a living current. Privacy mode engaged, Arya announced softly, then fell silent. For once, she read the room perfectly. It wasn't just desire I felt. It was something deeper, something that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure. Galen's eyes opened, silver meeting mine in the dim light. His fingers traced my palm before sliding between mine, and that simple touch sent sparks through our growing bond. His usual iron control wavered as his gaze darkened with need. Behind me, Kravos stirred, his grip tightened, pulling me closer as his lips found the sensitive spot behind my ear. "Still fighting it, sweetheart," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. I turned slightly, meeting his golden eyes. Gone was his usual playful mask, replaced by something that made my breath catch. "No," I whispered, the truth finally breaking free. "Not anymore." Joy burst through the bond, theirs and mine tangling together. Kravos' smile was brilliant as he leaned in, stealing a quick kiss that held the promise of more. Galen's grip on my hand tightened, drawing my attention back. "Maya," he breathed, "I need to hear you say it. Say you want this. Want us." I looked between them. Galen's intensity, Kravos' wild heart, both of them watching me like I was something they couldn't quite believe was real. "I want this," I said, my voice steady despite my racing pulse. "I want you, Galen." I squeezed his hand. "And you, Kravos." I pressed back against his warmth, together, completely. The moment my words registered, the bond sparked like a live wire between us. Galen cupped my face, his silver eyes dark as he kissed me, not with his usual restraint, but with a hunger that made me melt against him. His hands were steady as they slid under my shirt, but I could feel him trembling through the bond. "Impatient, Chief," Kravos murmured, his own hands wandering with deliberate intent. The dual sensation of their touches made my head spin. "Shut up, Kravos," Galen growled against my mouth. But there was no heat in it. I laughed, the sound turning into a gasp as Kravos found a particularly sensitive spot. "Still giving orders?" "Always." Galen pulled back just enough to help me out of my shirt. His eyes roamed over me, possessive and hungry. "All right?" More than. I reached for him, pulling him back to me as Kravos pressed closer behind. Getting undressed was a fumbling dance of hands and half-removed clothes, punctuated by Kravos' low chuckles and Galen's impatient sounds. I mapped the scars on Galen's chest, while Kravos left a trail of kisses down my neck. The bond grew stronger with each touch, letting me feel everything. Galen's fierce protectiveness, Kravos' wild joy, both of their overwhelming love. "Maya," Galen's voice was rough as he pulled me close. "We'll go slow." "Like hell we will," I cut him off, drawing him into another kiss. Kravos laughed against my shoulder, That's our girl. When we came together, it wasn't poetry or starbursts. It was better. It was real. It was Galen's controlled strength and Kravos's passionate energy combining perfectly. It was the bond snapping into place like a puzzle piece we'd been missing our whole lives. I felt what they felt, their pleasure amplifying mine until we moved as one, no space left for doubt or fear or anything but this. After, wrapped in their warmth with the bond humming contentedly between us, I finally felt complete. At home. Stop thinking so loud, Kravos mumbled against my hair. Make me, I challenged, but there was no energy behind it. Galen pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. Sleep. We've got you. For once, I didn't argue. I closed my eyes, letting their presence wash over me through our completed bond. For the first time since I'd stolen that data core and fled GI, I felt truly, completely safe. We had found our belonging, our completion. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. This was my family, my home, and I would protect it, no matter what. I dozed off with the whisper of contentment still lingering between us, a golden thread binding our souls, when Arya's voice pierced through my grogginess. Unidentified vessel approaching, and because someone has to be the responsible one here, they're armed to the teeth. I jerked back, heart hammering for an entirely different reason. Are you serious right now? Galen and Kravos exchanged a glance, their expressions turning serious. Move. Chapter 17. No Rest for the Wicked. Their shift to alertness rippled through our fresh bond before either of them moved. I felt the warmth of intimacy transform into razor-sharp focus as images flickered through my consciousness. Tactical assessments, escape routes, weapon locations. My pulse quickened at the sudden intensity flooding my mind. Multiple signatures on approach, Galen confirmed from the console. Through our connection, his expertise flowed into my awareness, letting me read the sensor data nearly as clearly as he could. The patterns looked oddly precise, stirring an uneasy flicker of recognition at the back of my thoughts. Kravos stretched with deceptive languidness, but beneath his casual demeanor, combat readiness hummed through the bond. Timing could be better, he remarked dryly, even as I sensed his mind racing. Oh, I don't know, Arya mused, her tone light but edged with mischief. Nothing says honeymoon like imminent peril. Should I compose a romantic battle symphony? My fingers fumbled with the buttons as I dressed, still reeling from the dizzying sensation of our thoughts merging. It was like their skills, their instincts, their very essence had been woven into my being, an overwhelming connection that made even simple movements feel new. I reached over, snatched up the data core from the console, and tucked it into my pocket, my pulse still racing with how fast GI had tracked us. There's an emergency transport, Galen said, his mind already mapping our route. Through the bond, I caught flashes of maintenance checks, hidden passages, contingency plans I hadn't considered. Assuming it still functions, I muttered, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt his certainty echo back. He'd done regular inspections, meticulous upkeep, quietly preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. Kravos's presence blazed, fierce and bright. Having doubts about our getaway vehicle? That's usually your department, sweetheart. Someone has to maintain perspective while you two play hero, I shot back. Despite my teasing, a ripple of gratitude coursed through me. We wouldn't stand a chance if we weren't all in this together. As touching as this banter is, Arya interjected, our uninvited guests are getting closer. Unless you'd prefer I plan your funeral, I've been polishing some dramatic monologues. The maintenance tunnel loomed, its shadows more inviting than daunting. I borrowed their innate spatial awareness through the bond, moving with a grace I'd never possessed. Each step lined up with theirs, our movements forming a synchronized dance none of us had rehearsed. Metal groaned overhead as our pursuers breached the safe house. The way they advanced, coordinated and precise, sent another twinge of recognition through me. Something about their attack pattern felt unsettlingly familiar. "Keep moving," Galen urged, though I'd already sensed his intention through our link. His tactical mind churned through angles, timing, threat assessments, all flowing into my head like a digital download. "You know," Arya commented as we navigated the passage, "this new coordinated fleeing is quite the improvement, though I do miss the chaotic scrambling. It had a certain charm." "Some of us prefer efficiency," I tossed back, ducking under a low-hanging pipe just as Kravos's memory warned me it was there. "Efficiency?" Arya snorted. "From the woman who once turned an escape pod into a comet? How disappointing." The transport waited ahead, hull dulled by time, but systems humming with potential. Our combined knowledge merged. Galen's grasp of its capabilities, my technical expertise, Kravos's combat instincts. My heart pounded as I initiated the exact startup sequence we needed, bypassing safeties in record time. Plasma fire erupted behind us, scorching the wall. I flinched. The attack pattern was too coordinated, too familiar, just like the hybrid infiltration methods I'd discovered in Sanctuary's compromised systems. "Incoming!" Kravos shouted, though I'd already felt the alarm spike in our bond. His fingers danced over his weapon with lethal grace. "They seem upset." "Shocking," I muttered, my hands flying across the console. "People trying to kill us? How novel." "To be fair," Arya chimed, "you do have that effect on people. It's part of your charm. That and your talent for property damage." We boarded as one, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. No confusion, no hesitation, just 3 parts of a whole snapping into place. "Multiple pursuit vessels launching," Kravos reported from Tactical. I sensed the spike of unease behind his calm words as he tracked their formation. Think they're mad about us breaching their facility, or just generally cranky? The transport shuddered under Galen's hands, roaring to life. What followed transcended mere cooperation. His piloting meshed with my systems knowledge, and Kravos' combat sense to form something entirely new. We moved as one entity, anticipating each other's needs before they surfaced. "Well," Arya mused as we spun through plasma fire, "at least your synchronized fleeing is more elegant than the usual method of escape." "I heard you the first time," I growled under my breath. "You aren't helping." We plunged into the asteroid field, my heart beating in perfect rhythm with Galen's and Kravos's, our minds linked in golden light. Every maneuver flowed effortlessly into the next, 3 sets of skills converging into something greater than their sum. Together we were unstoppable, even if Arya would never let me forget how I got here. Asteroids spun all around us in a jagged labyrinth of rock and shadow. Through our bond, I glimpsed Galen's evolving strategy, using debris as cover, luring our pursuers into choke points where their superior numbers counted for nothing. "Port engine's power coupling is failing," I warned, already implementing the fix I'd pulled from Galen's stored memory. "Arya, reroute auxiliary power." "Dealing with both pursuit ships and mechanical failures? How delightfully nostalgic," Arya said. "Usually you're the one causing technical difficulties, not fixing them." A massive asteroid loomed ahead. Instead of panic, I absorbed Galen's calm certainty through our link as he threaded us through a narrow gap, forcing the enemy ships to break formation. Kravos seized the opportunity, his targeting enhanced by our merged awareness. A direct hit. One pursuer spiraled away, spewing debris. "Their formations breaking," Kravos noted, satisfaction echoing through the bond before darkening into frustration. 4 ships splitting into pairs. "They're trying to flank us." I felt his anger spike as he recognized something else. "That's one of our standard pursuit techniques," he added grimly, voice taut with controlled fury. "These are Sanctuary's classified protocols. They're executing them perfectly." Cold dread slid under my skin. I felt the burn of betrayal flaring in Kravos's thoughts as he tracked their movement, maneuvers he had personally helped design. Galen's mind was already spinning, connecting all the dots I'd been too overwhelmed to see. The network breach in Sanctuary systems, that corrupted data core, this lethal precision. Someone hadn't just given GI access, they'd given them everything. "Worry about it later," Galen commanded, but I tasted the edge of suspicion darkening our shared link. "Maya, can you spoof their targeting systems?" My fingers flew over the console, inputting infiltration tricks I'd learned while working at GI. The parallels between these pursuers' approach and the station's infiltration hammered home the truth. "On it. Aria, scramble their signatures." "Finally, something more exciting than watching you three make eyes at each other," Aria teased, "though your competence is somewhat entertaining." I groaned. "Why are you like this? Why?" "If I recall correctly, Dr. Reynolds, you made me this way. Have you forgotten?" Another explosion lit the darkness as Kravos's next shot found its mark. 2 down, 2 to go. The remaining pursuers peeled off, clearly deciding we weren't worth the risk. Through our bond, relief tangled with leftover adrenaline. We'd escaped, but the question pounded in my thoughts. How deep did this betrayal go? "Well," Aria announced once we finally cleared the asteroid field, "it appears we survived. Again." "Sorry to disappoint," I muttered, but a rush of warmth fluttered through the bond as Kravos reached over to squeeze my hand. His touch sent a fresh surge of golden energy coursing up my arm, momentarily drowning out all the dark implications. "Don't worry," he murmured, voice pitched low. "I'm sure you'll find new ways to stir up chaos." Galen's amusement flickered along the connection, but his focus stayed razor-sharp. "Set course for the outer rim. We need to lie low until we figure out who sold us out." Through our link, I glimpsed the swirl of his calculations, analyzing who might hold that level of clearance, how far the security breach extended, which personnel we could still trust. The sting of betrayal lingered, sharp and undeniable. I'd seen evidence of GI's infiltration in Sanctuary systems, but this was worse. A direct betrayal from someone entrusted with the station's most guarded strategies. My thoughts churned with anger, confusion, and a flicker of guilt for not seeing it sooner. "I don't suppose we can enjoy our newfound bond for 5 minutes before tackling another crisis?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. My mind was already racing to align the pattern of infiltration with these perfected maneuvers. Kravos offered a crooked grin, but intensity pulsed beneath it. "Welcome to life with us, sweetheart. Never a dull moment." "Speaking of moments," Aria chimed, "shall I compile a list of potential traitors? I have theories ranging from mildly plausible to dramatically satisfying." I sagged back in my seat, letting their presences wash over me. Despite the looming danger, that sense of completion thrummed through our bond. No matter how dire the threat, they wouldn't face it alone. Neither would I. "You know," I murmured, gazing out at the streaking stars, "when I stole that data core, I never dreamed it would lead me here." Understanding pulsed through the bond, a shared awareness that transcended words. We had forged something unexpected, something that felt like home. "No regrets?" Kravos asked, though he clearly felt my answer through the link already. A small smile tugged at my lips, and I sensed Galen's quiet contentment melding with Kravos's bright warmth. "Not a single one." "Wonderful," Aria declared. "Now that we've established your mutual devotion, could we refocus on staying alive? I've grown oddly attached to your survival despite my better judgment." The transport hummed through the void, carrying us toward uncertainty. Betrayal had crept into Sanctuary, delivering GI the keys to hunt us down. But they hadn't accounted for 3 minds woven together, merging strengths and canceling weaknesses. We would find the traitor. We would uncover the truth, and once we did, they'd understand exactly how dangerous we had become. Chapter 18. How to Catch a Traitor. The hum of hyperspace vibrated beneath my fingertips, a steady rhythm I should have found soothing. Instead, my thoughts circled back to what we'd discovered, a perfect execution of Sanctuary's protocols orchestrated by someone on the inside. It felt so personal, like a knife aimed straight at the heart of everything my mates had built. My hand slid to my pocket, feeling the data core there. Arya chimed in from the navigation cabin speakers, cutting through my brooding. Status update. Immediate death threats have decreased significantly, though, given your collective penchant for drawing hostile fire, I'm sure that's only a temporary reprieve. I sagged into the co-pilot's seat, pinching the bridge of my nose. One of these days, I'm going to deactivate you. No, you're not, Kravos said, leaning against the console beside me. A faint pulse of wry amusement stirred through our bond. She's practically part of the family. Like a particularly aggressive virus, I muttered. Still, I couldn't deny Arya's sardonic commentary had grown on me. She'd been with me since my college days, and her dry observations always seemed to keep me grounded, whether I liked it or not. Galen, who'd been tapping at the nav screen, finally paused and looked over. Anger and protectiveness rippled through the bond in waves. We'll reach the outer rim in 6 hours, but we can't stay there long. Sanctuary's depending on us, and the longer we're gone, the more time that traitor has to dig in. My stomach nodded at the thought of our station left so vulnerable. Yes, I considered Sanctuary Station mine too. Once I'd been the suspicious newcomer my mates didn't fully trust. Now I was on the run with them, forced to leave behind the very place that had sheltered me. It was surreal and terrifying to imagine a mole feeding intel to GI from inside our own walls. I tried to focus on my breathing, reminding myself that we had more than just a traitor to worry about. We also had raw, damning evidence, names of test subjects, logs of unethical experiments, all that could destroy GI if we managed to release it. Processing a new bond while grappling with betrayal wasn't exactly restful, but Kravos's hand brushing my shoulder calmed me a bit. Through the bond, I sensed the same bone-deep exhaustion in him. He stood and wandered to the small galley unit. Well, seeing as no one's shooting at us right this second, we should celebrate with a drink. I raised an eyebrow. We barely escaped, not exactly in a party mood. Kravos tossed me a grin, tension flickering beneath it. Exactly why we should toast survival while we can. Galen? A subdued agreement pulsed through our link before Galen spoke. Might as well, better than brooding ourselves to death. I pushed up to join them, ignoring the twinge in my muscles. Kravos poured 3 small glasses of dark amber liquid and handed them around. When my fingers grazed his, sparks danced through the bond. To surviving another day, he said, eyes dancing with mischief. I tapped my glass to theirs. And making it count, I took a healthy swig of the drink and immediately began coughing. Damn! What's that? A flush of heat spread through my chest as I glared at Kravos, half annoyed and half amused. He burst out laughing. Careful, Doc, don't want you to choke, he teased, leaning in to give me a quick, playful kiss on the lips. He lingered there, his kiss growing bolder. I responded in kind, deepening the kiss until I could taste the mix of spiced drink and his unmistakable fire. The kiss ignited something raw and unspoken. His arms pulled me close, as if he'd been holding back for too long. His heartbeat, strong and steady, matched the rhythm of my own. Time seemed to stretch out, every second charged with the promise of something fiercely intimate. After what felt like a second, Kravos pulled away just enough to whisper, "I wasn't always this charming, you know." A short laugh escaped me. Oh? Hard to believe. He lifted a shoulder in mock seriousness. I used to take life far too seriously. Then I realized, if you don't laugh at the chaos, it'll swallow you whole. Galen set down his glass, pulling me to his lap. The solid warmth of him sent golden sparks through our bond, his desire mingling with mine until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I released a soft moan and curled into his embrace. His fingers brushed my lips, his silver eyes darkening to molten metal. Discipline was always my answer. I kept Sanctuary running with strict protocols, but seeing them turned against us from the inside, a spike of frustration shot through our bond, and my chest tightened at his wounded pride. Sanctuary was supposed to be a safe haven for people with nowhere else to go, and now someone was using its security like a weapon. I slid my legs over Galen's sides, settling right where I needed him most, while Kravos pressed closer behind me. Their combined presence anchored me, steadying my racing thoughts. I never imagined my life would look like this, either. When I stole that data from GI, I planned on disappearing, not bonding with two males who'd risk their lives for me. But here we are. Kravos grabbed my waist, guiding my hips in a slow circle against Galen's growing hardness. His lips traced fire down my neck, each kiss sending jolts of pleasure through our connection. And I, for one, wouldn't have it any other way. GI tried to hunt you across half the galaxy. They just didn't realize who they were dealing with. Fire coursed through me, and a shaky moan escaped as Kravos nipped at that sensitive spot behind my ear. They're realizing it now. Galen's grip tightened, and fierce protectiveness flared in our bond, matched by the heat of his arousal pressing against me. "You'll never be alone again," he promised, voice rough with need. My heart skipped at that quiet intensity in his silver eyes. I captured his mouth with mine, drowning in the golden sparks searing through our bond. Kravos hummed in approval, his hands sliding lower, squeezing my curves as I rocked against Galen's length. "Ah, yes," Arya piped up. "This must be another installment of your ongoing romantic interlude, though you do recall we have a traitor rummaging through your station's secrets, yes?" I groaned, forehead pressed to Galen's chest. "Arya, what? I'm merely pointing out that while you're busy raising endorphin levels, someone's undermining your entire operation. Also, GI is undoubtedly plotting your demise." Kravos laughed against my neck, the sound vibrating through me. "She has a point. We should probably discuss our next move." "This wasn't a move?" I asked innocently, circling my hips again just to feel Galen's sharp intake of breath. His fingers dug into my waist. "Maya." "Right," I sighed, letting their mix of arousal and amusement flow through our bond. "Trap the traitor first, celebrate later?" "Later," Galen promised, his voice carrying heat that made my insides melt. "Definitely later," Kravos agreed, pressing one last kiss to my neck before stepping back. I reluctantly climbed off Galen's lap, already missing their touch. But the golden warmth of our bond remained, wrapping around me like an embrace. Arya was right. A hollow ache resettled in my gut. Sanctuary was compromised, and we were out here in the black. I pulled back, trying to steel myself against the bleak images of the station's corridors I kept picturing, where guards patrolled in half-trust, uncertain who to suspect. Once upon a time, I was the outsider they'd eyed suspiciously. Now, someone else among them deserved all that suspicion. "We need a plan to flesh out the mole," Galen said tightly, adjusting his pants. "Whoever it is has top-level access to our security. They knew how we'd lock down the decks, how we'd respond to infiltration." Kravos set his drink aside, tension coiling in his stance. "This isn't just a code breach or a virus. It's personal knowledge of how we protect the station. We can't just walk back in and announce ourselves. That's a recipe for an ambush." "Yet we can't stay away," I said, voice trembling with an urgency I couldn't hide. "That station is our home. We can't let a traitor tear it apart or sell it to GI." A flicker of grim resolve passed between the males. Galen gave a curt nod. We slip in quietly, corner the mole, and regain control of the main console. Once we secure it, we broadcast GI's crimes station-wide and beyond. The galaxy has to see the truth. I swallowed, my fingers brushing the data core still tucked in my pocket, remembering how quickly the Federation might bury evidence if it was politically inconvenient. Even if we manage that, what if the Federation chooses GI's version of events? They could label us terrorists, blockade sanctuary, cut off essential supplies. Kravos' frustration bled into our bond. They can try. We'll make it impossible to ignore the data once it's out. Sanctuary's been threatened before and survived. The people there don't run from a fight. They stand up for what's right. Galen's hand found mine, eyes filled with unwavering conviction. We won't let them break us. We'll protect our station the same way we always have. The only difference now is we have you. And that data GI's so desperate to conceal. My throat tightened. I'd do anything to defend this station from an enemy lurking in its halls, to defend its people and to defend my mates. All right, I whispered, we just have to make sure we don't tear Sanctuary apart from within. Kravos pressed a small kiss to my temple. One step at a time. Root out the mole, secure the broadcast array, expose GI. We've got each other. That's enough. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of their heartbeats thrumming through our bond steady me. The day I first stumbled onto Sanctuary's deck, I was prepared for being locked in the brig. Now I was prepared to fight for a place I'd come to see as home. Well, I said softly, clearing my throat, we need a practical infiltration plan, so how do we get back to the station without handing the mole an easy target? Finally, Arya crowed. Operation Catch the Traitor can commence. Shall I run possible infiltration routes and risk assessments? Or do you prefer to wing it and pray? Galen sighed, but amusement flickered across our bond. Kravos chuckled, pulling me closer for one last brush of his lips against my neck. The data core pressed securely in my pocket held every damning secret. Everything from personal logs of GI's test subjects to memos detailing corporate bribes. If we didn't make it back, all that data would die with us. But if we succeeded? 6 hours, then, Galen murmured, his eyes dark with both strategic focus and rising heat as he pulled me closer. Through our bond, I caught flashes of infiltration routes mingling with the memory of my skin against his. We prepare, slip in under the radar, and show them exactly what happens when you betray Sanctuary. I set my jaw, letting their determination fuel my own even as Kravos's hands slid down my sides, his touch leaving trails of fire on my skin. Whatever awaited us back at Sanctuary, we'd face it together. I took one last swallow of the amber liquor, but the real warmth came from their touches, their desire flooding our bond until my breath caught. Galen's fingers found the fastenings of my clothes, each new inch of exposed skin sending golden sparks through the bond. Agreed. We're going home, I managed, voice breathy as they stripped away the layers between us. Yes, home, Kravos growled against my neck, his hands joining Galen's until I was bare before them. His kiss was hungry, possessive. Slowly, he lowered me down until I straddled Galen's lap backwards. Galen pressed against my back, his chest warm against my skin, hands rising to cup my breasts as our bond blazed brighter with each touch. Privacy mode engaged, Arya announced dryly. Try not to break the ship. Her voice faded, just as Galen's mouth skittered along my shoulders, neck, and back, making me gasp. The galaxy could wait. Right now there was only this, our bond burning like stars, 3 hearts beating as one, and the perfect certainty of belonging. The rest was just details. Chapter 19. Twisting the Code. We eased into Sanctuary's lower airlock, the hatch sealing behind us with a faint hiss. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Galen tapped a final command into the override panel, and the corridor lights flickered to life. His eyes flicked to Kravos, then me, the bond humming with shared tension. We're in. No official docking logs. That'll buy us time. Kravos nodded, scanning our surroundings. Never thought I'd see the day we had to sneak into our own station. I swallowed hard. My hand brushed the data core hidden in my pocket. At least we have your codes to bypass the main docking protocols. Otherwise, we'd be flagged the second we set foot in here. Arya chimed in. Clever. You do realize, though, that subtlety has a questionable success rate with you three. I stifled a laugh and failed miserably. Maybe we'll surprise you, Arya. Her tone dripped with skepticism. I'd love to be surprised. Galen shot me a pointed look, as if telling me to keep Arya from monologuing, but I couldn't help feeling a faint surge of relief at her familiar voice. My life had turned upside down, but at least this was familiar. My AI refused to let me panic in silence. We made our way down the maintenance corridor, stepping over old supply crates. The overhead lights flickered softly, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. Beneath that hum, I felt a deeper current, as if every shadow loomed with the possibility of betrayal. The station no longer felt like the safe haven I'd once stumbled onto in desperation. Kravos slowed near a junction. So how do we find our mole? We have partial infiltration logs but no name. Could be anyone with top clearance. Galen clenched his jaw. We hit the lab. If GI's infiltration includes station data, that's where the final puzzle pieces would be. Whoever's tampering with the internal logs, they'll show up there eventually. My stomach twisted at the thought. Let's hope we catch them before they sabotage the entire place. Arya broke in again, her tone measured but wry. I'm scanning local security feeds. No sign of a security team in this wing. A pause. I do, however, see a single occupant in the lab. Their ID is coming up blank. Suspicious, no? My heart kicked faster. That might be them. Galen motioned for us to follow, leading us around the corner. Arya keeps scanning. If anyone else is patrolling, warn us. She hummed. Yes, yes. I'll be your personal alarm. Kravos smirked at her remark, but said nothing, keeping a protective pace at my flank. I tried to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. Through my mates' minds, I realized that Sanctuary was never this quiet, even in its lower decks. If the traitor had reactivated GI's virus, we were in for trouble. We eased down a twisting corridor with the overhead light still flickering. I couldn't help remembering my frantic attempt back in this very lab to patch the bio-digital infiltration. It was a living piece of code that adapted to every fix I threw at it. I'd quarantined it then, but if the mole set it loose again, the station could be fully compromised. Galen stopped at a sealed hatch. His silver eyes flicked to me. I suspect the virus is back online. If the traitor's messing with system logs, they'd need direct access to the lab's main interface. We hit that first, sever the code before it spreads. He keyed in a security override while Kravos hovered, tension rolling through the bond. The door refused to budge, locked from inside. Arya hummed. I can unlock it, but they'll know the moment I do. Do it, Galen muttered. We can't tiptoe around forever. She beeped in acknowledgement. Moments later, the door hissed open. Kravos stepped in first, blaster drawn, and Galen followed, scanning the dimly lit lab. I lingered behind, forcing down the unease that spiked at the sight of scattered cables and half-dead monitors. A single figure hovered near a console, and my heart lurched when I recognized the lanky frame. He was supposed to be an analyst under Galen and Kravos. Quiet, efficient, the one who'd once reported how my data core meltdown threatened the station. Kravos leveled his weapon. Lasco? He spun, eyes darting. You! What are you doing here? I froze, shock punching the air from my lungs. You're the one feeding GI. Galen's fury rippled in the bond. All this time, you were undermining us from within. Lasco let out a short, bitter laugh. Spare me the outrage. GI offered a real future. Sanctuary can't stand against them, not once they deploy the virus fully. I was just... Kravos cut him off, stepping closer. Stand down. My stomach twisted. I wasn't built for standoffs. My mates had the weapons and I had the console. The bond flickered with protective impulses from both males, encouraging me to keep to the background. That I could do. Lasco glanced at me, then the monitors. A twisted grin crossed his features. You can't patch it twice, Doc. GI's virus is unstoppable. I've reactivated the core threads. Soon the station's entire mainframe will be ours. Arya hissed from my earpiece, her sarcasm subdued by alarm. He's not bluffing. I see invasive subroutines spiking. The virus is evolving. If we don't cut it, it'll systematically lock every system. Then I'll cut it out, I said, forcing my voice steady. I moved to the console's side, ignoring Lasco just 7 feet away. My heart hammered as I tapped the neural interface, scanning lines of living code morphing faster than any standard firewall could handle. Behind me, I heard Galen demand, "Stop it!" Lasco barked a laugh. "It's too late for that. GI's virus will wipe this entire station off the map." I tuned them out, focusing on the code swirling across the screen. My stomach lurched at the weight of the data core in my pocket. Hooking it up here would be suicidal, instantly corrupting its precious contents. The virus recognized me. It recognized the patches I installed last time. My heart raced as I hammered in new lines of organic encryption, trying to slip them under the virus's radar before it adapted. Arya fed me real-time data. Thread 1 quarantined. Hurry, it's forking new branches. 2, 3. Oh dear. Don't panic me, I hissed under my breath, sweat forming on my brow. The bond flared with tension. Even from across the room, I felt Galen's anger, Kravos' simmering threat toward Lasco. A shriek of sparks erupted as Lasco wrenched free of Kravos' hold, elbowing a table. I yelped, nearly losing my place in the code, but Galen lunged, slamming him against a metal support. My pulse pounded as the bond flooded with fury. I had to trust them to keep him contained. I had the station's survival in my hands. I cut the last viral thread. The console beeped, uncertain. "Come on," I muttered. The display flickered, then lines of code froze. A second beep. The virus's subroutines twitched, half-coded attempts swirling, then died as my final encryption locked them out. Arya sighed. Quarantine complete. GI's infiltration is cut off, for now. My shoulders sagged, adrenaline thrashing in my veins. I turned to see Kravos forcing Lasco back at gunpoint while Galen tightened a cuff around his wrist. Lasco glared, panting like an animal caught in a trap. Galen's voice trembled with anger. "You nearly destroyed everything we built here. Why?" Lasco snorted, then winced as Kravos shoved him. "Because GI pays more? Because I'd rather live under them than die defending a lost cause? Sanctuary is doomed." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "That virus you reactivated? I just quarantined it. No thanks to you. And guess what? We have all the logs on GI's corruption. We're going to broadcast them, and your sabotage won't stop us." His lips curled, but a flicker of fear showed in his eyes. "You think GI can't spin your worthless evidence?" Kravos pressed the muzzle of his blaster to Lasco's jaw. "We'll see what they can spin once the galaxy sees how they twisted the Nixara protocol into a weapon." Lasco's breath rasped. "You're all idiots. GI is unstoppable. They'll crush this station. They'll kill you all." Galen's grip on Lasco's cuff tightened, a quiet, lethal promise in his eyes. "We decide what happens in this station. You're done. If I have my way, you'll rot in the brig." A shudder passed through Lasco, but he tried to maintain a sneer. "You can't keep me locked up forever." I rubbed my tired eyes, stepping away from the console. The bond pulsed with relief from Galen and Kravos, tinged with lingering anger. "Long enough for us to show the galaxy GI's real face," I said. "They won't have time to bail you out." Arya made a coughing sound, injecting a faint dryness back into her tone. Yes, very inspiring. "Now might be a good time to finalize that galaxy-shaking broadcast, unless you prefer hugging the traitor longer." A bubble of unexpected laughter escaped me, tension easing. "Oh, Arya." My gaze flicked to Kravos and Galen. "But if we're going to broadcast this data core," I tapped my pocket, "we need a secure terminal. One that isn't crawling with GI's virus. Otherwise, we lose every shred of evidence the second I plug it in. Galen's jaw flexed, his silver eyes flickering with thought. We have a backup comm station near the subarray. If the virus hasn't spread there, it could work. Kravos cast me a fierce grin, the bond heating my cheeks. I like the sound of that. Let's move, Doc. Lasco struggled, hissing curses, but the males dragged him toward the exit. The bond thrummed with purpose. Before following them out, I placed a hand on the console, feeling the leftover hum of the quarantined virus. My mind flashed to that first time when I stumbled on GI testing unwilling subjects, how close I'd come to losing everything. Arya spoke quietly. "Are you okay, Dr. Reynolds?" I let out a shaky breath. "I will be. Let's get out of here." As soon as we stepped into the corridor, a faint siren wailed overhead. An alarm. The bond jerked with fresh tension. Kravos hauled Lasco along, and Galen pivoted, scanning the shadows. My heart thudded like a drum roll. If GI discovered their sabotage had been thwarted, they could escalate to outright force. Arya whispered, "I sense multiple signals converging on this deck, possibly armed." My stomach tightened. Galen and Kravos exchanged glances, fierce resolve lighting their eyes. We'd found the traitor, locked the virus, but GI wasn't done. With the station half in disarray, we were vulnerable to a direct assault. Chapter 20. No Mercy for Betrayal. We dragged Lasco through the corridor, alarms still blaring. The station's walls shook with the echoes of distant firefights. Mercenaries crawling through sub-levels, half the system still raw from the virus infiltration. My heart thundered, but the bond surged with single-minded purpose from Galen and Kravos. Lasco stumbled, cursing. "You can't hold me forever. GI is—" Kravos's grip tightened on his arm. He didn't reply. Neither did Galen. Through the bond, I felt something shift in Kravos. A sudden, cold resolve that sent a chill through my veins. He wrenched Lasco toward a narrow side passage, ignoring the path to the brig. I blinked, half a second behind his intent. Galen caught my gaze, silent agreement in his eyes. We weren't wasting time, not on a cell that could be overrun by GI mercs at any moment. The bond pulsed, harsh and protective. I tasted Kravos's fury, felt the echo of Lasco's betrayal thrumming through him. My stomach clenched, but no argument formed on my lips. Lasco had put my life in danger, nearly ended us all. We veered into an auxiliary airlock, a cramped chamber used for external hull repairs. Lasco realized too late where we were. He fought, wild-eyed, but Kravos barely flinched, shoving him against the hatch controls. The overhead klaxons stuttered, drowning out Lasco's frantic yells. "No, wait!" He clawed at Kravos' arm, voice cracking with panic. "This is murder!" Galen stood silent, stance rigid. He pressed a palm to the panel, bypassing the safety locks. Arya did not speak. She too remained silent, offering no sarcastic commentary now. Only the bond roiled with tension, my pulse throbbing in my throat. Lasco kicked at the threshold, desperation twisting his face, but Kravos forced him inside, muzzle of his blaster aimed at the traitor's skull. Each ragged breath rattled in my ears. "Chief Galen," Lasco tried again, raw fear bleeding into every syllable. "You're better than this. Sanctuary's better than this." Galen's expression stayed unreadable, though the bond thrummed with cold acceptance. He reached over and slammed the inner hatch, sealing Lasco in the chamber. Through the transparent partition, I saw Lasco's eyes widen, mouth forming soundless pleas behind the thick glass. Kravos hit the final override with measured calm. No hesitation, no mercy. The outer hatch slid open, a rush of depressurization, a muted scream I couldn't hear, and Lasco vanished into the void. Silence flooded back as the inner hatch cycled. My heart hammered, ears ringing from the abrupt hush. I should have felt horror, maybe condemnation, but instead a strange, terrible relief washed over me. The traitor who nearly destroyed us was gone. He could never endanger my mates or sanctuary again. Kravos lowered his blaster, breathing harshly. I caught a flicker of something in his golden eyes, but the bond only pulsed with satisfaction. Galen reached out, gripping my nape, bringing his forehead to mine. No one spoke. Even Arya stayed silent, as if acknowledging that words had no place here. I sucked in air, lungs burning. My body trembled from adrenaline, from the lethal finality of what we'd done. And yet I felt safe, protected. Kravos glanced at me, worry creeping into his expression, but I mustered a faint nod. I wasn't shattering, I was simply alive. We stepped away from the airlock. Kravos exhaled, letting the lethal calm fade from his eyes, but the bond thrummed with tension. Galen ran a hand through his hair, turning a sharp gaze on me. "We still have to push out that broadcast." "I know," I breathed, clutching the data core to my chest. It burned hot in my hands, the key to toppling GI's empire. But the mercenaries, they're everywhere. Galen's jaw set. "Then we clear them out. Our squads are waiting on us." "Let's go," Kravos said, voice tight. He led the way down the corridor, the bond radiating protective purpose from both males. My pulse drummed in my ears as Galen guided us toward the station's mid-levels. Arya stayed curiously quiet, as if recognizing we were past comedic banter. Through battered corridors, flickering emergency lights revealed scorch marks from earlier firefights. The smell of burnt circuitry clung to everything. We came upon a cluster of station officers, Galen's enforcers. They crouched behind a collapsed bulkhead, exchanging shots with a squad of mercenaries pinned at the far end. The instant they recognized Galen, relief lit their faces. "Chief," one warrior called, voice ragged from combat. "Glad you're alive. These goons are dug in." Galen glanced at me, then Kravos, the bond throbbing with determination. "We'll push them out. Kravos, you lead the left flank. Drock, get your warriors ready." Kravos nodded. "On it." Then he flicked his gaze to me. "Stay low, Doc. They see you with that data core. We're in trouble." I swallowed but nodded. He needn't say more. My skill set definitely wasn't fighting. I ducked behind the bulkhead as Galen and Kravos coordinated a quick assault. I locked down tight the fear that tried to erupt from my chest. My mates were trained warriors, and so far they hadn't disappointed or put me in danger. The least I could do was lock my fear out of the bond. Overhead, lights flickered under the station's battered power grid. I tried to steady my breathing while the warriors relayed commands through a short-range comm line. Shots erupted, sending sparks flying down the corridor. Officers hunkered behind scattered crates, returning blaster fire. Every hiss of plasma made my stomach roil, but I held tight to the data core as if it anchored me to the present. The bond roiled with adrenaline, Galen's strategic calm, Kravos' lethal confidence. In the distance, multiple firefights raged. Static-laced voices crackled in Galen's earpiece. "Chief, we've cornered a group of mercs on Deck 7, but our team is requesting backup." Kravos tapped his comm, swiftly relaying instructions. "Drock, divert 2 squads to the sub-level corridor. Pin them from both sides." Then, with a sharp gesture, he rallied the station warriors flanking us. "We push now!" he barked, his voice cut through the din, confident and unwavering. At once, the squads leapt from cover. In a sudden coordinated surge, the warriors advanced behind Kravos' lead, pinning the mercenaries from the flank. Plasma bolts scorched the corridor's metal walls, sparks arcing overhead. Galen hammered a short volley of blaster fire from the opposite side, forcing the mercs into retreat. A second later, a separate team burst from a side passage, another angle of attack orchestrated through Galen's and Kravos' comms. Taken by surprise, the mercenaries panicked, curses echoing as they staggered deeper into the station. One by one, they gave ground under the onslaught, the warrior squads pushing them relentlessly. I clutched the data core, my heart pounding, a mixture of terror and relief swirling in my chest. Through the bond, I sensed Galen's razor-sharp tactics and Kravos's fierce devotion, each echoing in the squads who fought for them. Finally, the mercenaries broke, scattering in half a dozen directions, desperate to regroup. A ragged cheer went up from the warriors, echoing along the corridor. My breath caught in my throat as I stood, heart thudding from the adrenaline rush. We'd secured one corridor, but the entire station was a war zone of overlapping skirmishes. Galen tapped his comm again, exchanging quick updates with other squads. "Deck 7 is contained," a muffled voice reported. "Lost 2 warriors, but we're holding." Another team checked in from engineering, confirming they'd cornered a merc group by the secondary airlocks. The entire station was alight with cross-communication, each squad working in tandem to reclaim their home. I pressed a hand to my chest, relief mingling with dread. That was just one corner of Sanctuary reclaimed, but we were far from done. Still, seeing the mercenaries forced out, hearing the cheers from our squads, I felt a surge of hope. Kravos strode back toward me, eyes flashing with pride and lingering danger. "We'll keep pushing. You stay behind us. The broadcast is next." Galen glanced my way, the bond surging with protectiveness. "We move fast. The others will hold the lines, but we have to ensure the final transmission, understood?" I managed a tight nod, chest still flooding with relief. "Okay." And with that we pressed on, squads rallying behind their leaders, ready to sweep through the station and drive out GI's remaining mercenaries once and for all. Firefights erupted on multiple decks, but we pushed through. Shots rang out farther up the corridor, louder and more frenzied than before. A frantic comm line buzzed in Galen's ear, another squad pinned down. My pulse spiked. We were racing against time, half the station ablaze with overlapping battles, the other half clinging to hope. Clutching the data core, I swallowed hard. How would we even make it to the backup comm station room? Chapter 21. Where the battle ends, desire begins. "Chief, they've barricaded the main junction," came a squad leader's voice over the comms. "We're trying to flush them out, but they've got heavier firepower than we expected." Galen answered in a low, controlled tone, rallying the station officers. "Coordinate with Deck 7 squads, push them from both sides. Kravos and I will secure the backup comm station room. Report once you have it locked down." A chorus of affirmatives crackled back. My heart pounded. The mercenaries infesting Sanctuary weren't giving up, but our squads refused to surrender. Step by bloody step, we were reclaiming the station from GI's hired guns. Kravos led me through a side corridor, each footstep echoing off battered metal. "We're making progress. You okay, Doc?" My suit bore stains from blood that I didn't remember getting on me. The scent was mostly masked by burnt circuitry and singed plasma. I nodded, though my legs felt shaky. "Yes, just let's finish this." Galen's voice cut in. "Once we push the data out, GI's mercs lose their paycheck, and everything changes." We pressed on, squads rallying behind us. At last, we reached a sealed door leading to the backup comm station room near the station's sub-array. A battered console blinked red, jammed from the inside. I dropped to one knee, hooking up my wrist console. "Arya, are you reading anything?" Her response crackled softly. "Yes, detecting a jammer inside. They're trying to prevent an external signal." My chest tightened. "We can't let them. I'll breach the door, then we'll handle it." "Make it fast," Galen said, scanning the hallway for more mercs. I bypassed the lock, ignoring sweat trickling down my neck. Almost. Got it. With a hiss, the door slid open. Instantly, a hail of blaster fire lit up the threshold, forcing us back. Kravos hissed a curse, returning shots with lethal precision. Galen signaled the squads behind us, who rushed forward to contain the threat. The corridor shook with the thunder of plasma bolts. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. One merc bolder than his companions lunged forward with his weapon trained on me. Through our bond, I felt Kravos's rage spike before his blast dropped the mercenary. The protective fury from both my mates slammed into me through our connection, almost making me stagger. "I needed to open that door," I shouted over my shoulder, trying to sound casual despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Don't do that again," Kravos snarled, his golden eyes blazing. The bond carried more than just anger. There was fear there, too, raw and sharp at how close that shot had come. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead to our next move. These mercs weren't going to stop me from exposing the truth. Through our bond, my determination leaked into their consciousness. Twin growls of frustration echoed behind me. Right. This whole shared emotions thing meant they could feel exactly how little I planned to stay safely in the background. More growls erupted as that thought filtered through our connection. "Fine," I muttered, giving up any pretense of hiding my intentions. "But next time I'll try not to broadcast my recklessness quite so clearly." "There won't be a next time," Galen rumbled, his presence steady at my back, even as exasperation colored our bond. "That's what you think," I murmured under my breath, then winced as another wave of protective irritation washed through our connection. This bond was going to take some getting used to, especially the part where I couldn't hide anything from them anymore. Within minutes, the mercenaries inside the room realized they were outmatched. Some tossed their weapons aside, others fled through a back hatch. The station squad stormed in, clearing the corners. I lurched through the final wisps of smoke, eyes stinging. There, at the room's center, half a console setup flickered and beeped. The jamming device glowed red on one side, cables running to the main array lines. Galen and Kravos kept watch while I hurried to the console. My heart hammered as I yanked out cables, hooking the data core into a port. Arya guided me with short, clipped instructions. The battered screens flickered, showing half-damaged code, but the link was there. Progress bars rippled. My breath caught, tears burning my eyes as GI's stolen logs, test subject testimonials, and horrific images began uploading to every open channel. This was it, the entire reason we'd fought so hard. 90%. "They're trying to jam you," Arya murmured, "but squads must be forcing them back. 98. Done." A hush fell. Then the battered screens flared with lines of text and images, unstoppable. I exhaled a shaky laugh. We'd done it. The entire galaxy could see GI's crimes now. Outside, a ragged cheer rose, carried by comm lines from squads on multiple decks. Reports flew in, mercenaries retreating, half-lost engineering reclaimed. Adrenaline crashed over me, leaving me dizzy as Kravos and Galen swept the corridor with lethal precision. The bond pulsed with triumph and relief as I set the data core aside, my hands trembling from the fight. Their eyes locked onto mine, and the shift in our connection was electric, from battle-ready focus to raw hunger. Kravos stalked toward me like a predator, each step deliberate, his golden eyes burning with need. He caught my waist and yanked me against him, the bond sparking between us as leftover adrenaline ignited into liquid heat. His mouth crushed down on mine with desperate urgency, swallowing my surprised whimper. I fisted my hands in his uniform as he devoured me, kissing me like he needed to prove I was real, alive. His. Through our bond, his relief and desire slammed into me like a physical force. Galen prowled behind me, one hand sliding across my stomach while the other worked at the fastenings of my tactical suit. The bond spiraled with shared want, 3 hearts thundering in perfect sync. He dragged my face around to his kiss slower but no less consuming, the kind that made stars explode behind my eyes. I arched between them, drowning in the golden storm of our connection. Every brush of fingers against newly exposed skin, every press of lips amplified through the bond, until pleasure bordered on sweet torture. Their hands roamed with rising urgency, claiming and cherishing with each touch. "We did it," Kravos growled against my throat as my suit fell away, teeth grazing sensitive skin. "We're free." A moan escaped me as Galen's mouth found my bare shoulder, his teeth scraping gently. "The station is secure," he rumbled, his iron control shattering. "Sanctuary is ours again." I fumbled behind me for the door controls, breath coming in short gasps. "Then maybe we should celebrate." The lock engaged with a satisfying click. Kravos' smile turned dangerous as Galen's hands explored my bare skin. "I love the way you think, sweetheart." The bond blazed between us, golden light drowning out everything else. We had won. We were safe. We were home. And this time, no one would take it from us. And as their touches shifted from desperate to deliberate, as the last barriers fell away, as 3 hearts beat as one, I knew this moment was everything I'd never dared to dream of. A home, a purpose, a love strong enough to change the galaxy. I was finally where I belonged. Epilogue. The Whistleblower's Recipe for Love. 2 years later, the scent of seared spice meat filled the air as I stirred a bubbling pan, adjusting the heat on the old-fashioned stove Kravos had insisted on hauling into our quarters. A modern auto chef could have done this in seconds, but he claimed real cooking was an experience, one that required effort, skill, and now and then, someone to make sure he didn't set the kitchen on fire. I rolled my eyes when I heard the unmistakable sound of Kravos sneaking up behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his breath warm against my neck. "What's the secret ingredient this time, Doc?" I smirked, leaning back against him. "Not telling. You'll have to suffer." He groaned, nipping at my ear. Cruel, utterly heartless. Galen, seated at the small dining table, glanced up from his datapad with a faint shake of his head. "It's pepperroot, same as last time." I threw him a look over my shoulder. "You take the fun out of everything, you know that?" Kravos hummed against my skin. "I don't know. I'd say we have plenty of fun." I elbowed him in the ribs, which only made him laugh before turning back to the food. The meal was coming together, something that wasn't only fuel, but a ritual, a way of grounding us after days of chaos. Through the wide windows of our quarters, the gentle glow of Sanctuary Station's central dome cast golden light over the cityscape beneath it, illuminating a place that was once riddled with uncertainty, but now stood as a beacon of something better. We'd spent 2 years rebuilding after GI's downfall, stabilizing the station's infrastructure, chasing off every opportunistic gang that tried to gain a foothold. The process was grueling but necessary. Now, Sanctuary wasn't just a temporary haven for refugees and whistleblowers. It was our home, fortified by the leadership of Galen and Kravos, and anchored by the determination of its people. Outside, vendors' stalls bustled with travelers, mercenaries seeking honest contracts rather than exploitative ones, and traders from every corner of the galaxy. The Intergalactic Federation, after months of intense political posturing, had eventually recognized our station's new authority, partly due to the mountain of evidence we'd broadcast, which kicked off a lengthy investigation and led to the complete dismantling of Galactic Innovations. Charges of illegal trials, forced abductions, and mass-scale corruption had stuck, culminating in widespread arrests. Many GI executives still faced the Federation's courts, the final verdicts rolling in slowly. As for Maya Reynolds, the so-called whistleblower who helped topple GI, I was still learning to live without constant fear. These days I spent my hours researching more benign applications of the Nixara protocol, consulting with outpost med centers that wanted to adapt my biotech for actual healing instead of exploitation. Galen called it redemption work. Kravos called it me making the galaxy less awful. I just found it fulfilling, seeing the protocol used the way it was meant to be. I leaned against the railing of our private suite, letting my gaze drift over the lively thoroughfares below. Blaster-scorched walls now replaced or patched, entire neighborhoods reclaimed. A pulse of contentment thrummed through me at the sight of half the station's population going about their day, fearless. We'd worked hard to make Sanctuary truly safe, forging alliances with smaller factions and ensuring no single corporation could overshadow the station's autonomy again. Kravos let go of me, moving to grab plates while Galen set aside his datapad. The moment he stood, he pulled me in, his kiss slow and lingering. "You work too much." I raised a brow. "And you don't?" He didn't answer, just kissed me again, his fingers trailing down my spine. Kravos made a noise of protest behind us. "If I have to wait for dinner, I swear." Galen ignored him, only pulling away when I was breathless. I gave him a playful swat before turning back to serve the food. "Sit down, both of you. I slaved over this." Kravos snorted but obeyed, dropping into a chair with all the grace of a wild animal. Galen took his seat with more composure. I placed the plates in front of them, watching as they dug in, and felt something warm settle in my chest. Love. This was love. Messy, complicated, chaotic. Ours. Before I could take a bite, the comm panel on the wall blinked to life with an all-too-familiar voice. "I calculate a 72% probability that Maya's recipe will be edible this time." I groaned, rubbing my temples. "Arya." Kravos almost choked on his drink, laughing, while Galen only sighed. "We should have left you on the last upgrade station." Arya's voice had certainly changed over the past 2 years. Because Kravos had given her an upgrade that somehow made her more sarcastic. Worse, she now had a physical form, a small, hovering drone he built, insisting that if she's going to annoy us, she should at least have a body to dodge with. Arya's drone zipped over to the table, a tiny light blinking as she hovered above the food. "Analysis complete, protein ratio is adequate, seasoning could use work, presentation is..." A pause, then a slow beep. "Acceptable." I brandished my fork at the floating menace. "If you had taste receptors, I'd make you eat space rations for a week." "I am glad I don't. However, I can simulate the experience if you would like to feel validated." Kravos was grinning like a madman. "She's so much better this way." Galen shook his head. "We should have destroyed her while we had the chance." Arya beeped, unfazed. "You two would be lost without me." I sighed, taking a bite of my food. "All right, Doc," Kravos said, resting his chin on his hand, eyes glinting. "Tell us, what's the whistleblower's recipe for love?" I tapped my fork against the plate, pretending to consider it. "Let's see. A healthy dose of trust, a dash of reckless decision-making, a pinch of sheer dumb luck." Galen arched a brow. "That's a disaster waiting to happen." I smiled. "Exactly, and yet here we are." Arya hummed. "That tracks. If you want a more structured recipe, I can provide a 34-step analysis of your relationship dynamic." Kravos raised a glass. "Let's drink before she does that." Galen sighed, but he clinked his glass too, and I knew he wouldn't have it any other way. We drank, we ate, we laughed. Outside, the station lights glowed, now stable and bright, no longer flickering with sabotage or infiltration. We had made that happen, from the day we first broadcast GI Secrets to this moment, 2 years on. And I knew I had found exactly where I was meant to be, in Sanctuary's heart, cooking questionable dinners while building a better future, bound by the bond I shared with 2 impossible males and an AI drone who never let me forget how far we'd come. Did Maya, Galen, and Kravos's journey through danger and love pull you in? There's a whole galaxy of romance waiting for you. Join the Stellar Kittens community on reamstories.com/Ava Martin, where the adventure continues with free novellas and short stories for followers and members, exclusive character art and behind-the-scenes content, bonus stories that are too hot for YouTube, early access to upcoming releases. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new sci-fi romance adventure. Because here, in this corner of the universe, love defies gravity, fate is written in the stars, and the best romances come with a little danger. Join us, where the stars burn brighter, the love is cosmic, and the adventures never end. All links are in the description below. Safe travels, space lovers!